The silver dagger trembled in Lyra's hands as ancient runes blazed to life along its blade, casting ethereal light across the dusty attic where her grandmother's secrets lay buried. The moment her blood touched the ancestral steel, visions crashed through her mind, golden-eyed wolves bowing before a crescent moon throne, a crown that sang with starlight, and a prophecy written in the language of her very bones. When the last daughter of Linares claims her blade, the fallen dynasty shall rise again through love's sacrifice. She gasped, stumbling backward as the dagger clattered to the floor, its glow fading like a dying star. But the mark on her wrist, a silver crescent that had appeared overnight, continued to pulse with otherworldly light. Outside, a wolf's howl split the midnight air, deep and commanding. Lyra pressed her hand to the window, watching as a massive black wolf emerged from the tree-line, golden eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her soul recognize what her mind could not yet accept. Some legacies sleep for centuries, waiting for love to awaken them. Chapter 1. The morning after the dagger incident, Lyra Whitmore stood in her cramped Chicago apartment bathroom, staring at the silver crescent moon that had mysteriously appeared on her inner wrist. The mark seemed to shimmer with its own inner light, defying every logical explanation she could muster. She'd scrubbed at it until her skin was raw, tried concealer, even considered the possibility that she'd gotten a tattoo during some forgotten drunken evening, though she'd never been drunk enough to forget something like that. Her phone buzzed against the marble countertop. Another missed call from her boss at the museum. She was supposed to be cataloging medieval artifacts today, not standing half-dressed in her bathroom questioning her sanity. But as she reached for her phone, the mark pulsed, and suddenly the bathroom filled with the scent of pine needles and moonlight. The mirror shimmered, and for just a moment, she saw not her own reflection, but a woman with her face wearing an elaborate silver crown, surrounded by wolves with eyes like liquid gold. "This isn't happening," she whispered, gripping the sink until her knuckles went white. The vision faded, but the scent lingered, wild and intoxicating. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, all those strange bedtime stories about moon princesses and wolf kings, tales Lyra had dismissed as folklore. "Every story has roots in truth, little moon," Nana had always said. "Someday you'll understand what flows in your veins." Lyra had inherited more than just her grandmother's cottage in Moonhaven, Montana. She'd inherited secrets that were apparently determined to surface, whether she was ready or not. 2 hours later, she was on a plane to Montana, having called in the first sick day of her career. The mark had stopped glowing, but she could feel it like a brand against her skin, warm and insistent. Something was calling her home. Home to a place she'd only visited a handful of times, where the mountains touched the sky and the forests held whispers older than civilization. The small town of Moonhaven looked exactly as she remembered from childhood visits, a handful of buildings nestled in a valley between towering peaks, with more pickup trucks than people, and a diner that probably hadn't updated its menu since 1985. But as her rental car wound through the mountain roads, Lyra felt something shift inside her chest, like a key turning in a long-locked door. She pulled into the gravel driveway of her grandmother's cottage just as the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The little house sat on the edge of the forest, surrounded by wild gardens that had grown beautifully untamed in the months since Nana's passing. But she wasn't alone. A man stood in the deepening shadows beside the porch, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that caught the dying light like polished gold. Even from a distance, something about him made her pulse quicken, not with fear, but with recognition so deep it seemed to bypass her conscious mind entirely. He stepped forward as she climbed out of the car, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. "Lyra Whitmore," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I've been waiting for you." "Who are you?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would change everything. "My name is Kai Blackthorne," he said, golden eyes never leaving her face. "And I'm here because of what you've awakened." As if responding to his words, the mark on her wrist flared to life, silver light spilling through the fabric of her sleeve. Kai's eyes tracked to the glow, and something like relief crossed his features. "The bloodline stirs," he murmured. "After 3 centuries of silence, the last daughter of House Linares has finally come home." "House Linares?" Lyra's voice came out as barely a whisper. "That's impossible. My grandmother told stories, but they were just stories." Kai's smile was both gentle and fierce. "Your grandmother was the keeper of the greatest secret in our world. She was the guardian of the last royal bloodline of the Northern Pax, and you, Lyra, are the rightful heir to the moon crown." The world tilted around her. "You're talking about werewolves." "I'm talking about your birthright." He stepped closer, and she caught that wild scent again, pine and moonlight, and something indefinably masculine that made her want to step closer rather than away. "I'm talking about a dynasty that fell 300 years ago when your ancestor, Queen Selene, was betrayed and murdered along with her entire court. I'm talking about the prophecy that said her bloodline would return when the Pax needed them most." Lyra's legs felt unsteady. "This is insane." "Look at your mark," Kai said softly. "Look at it and tell me this is insane." Against her better judgment, she pushed up her sleeve. The crescent moon blazed like captured starlight, and as she watched, additional symbols began to appear around it, intricate knotwork that seemed to tell a story in a language she didn't understand but somehow felt in her bones. "The royal seal," Kai breathed. "It's more complete than we dared hope." He looked up at her, and the intensity in his golden eyes made her heart skip. "The ancient magic recognizes you, Lyra. Your blood remembers what your mind has forgotten." "What do you want from me?" she asked, though she was no longer sure she wanted to know the answer. "I want to help you claim what's yours," he said. "I want to help you understand the power that's awakening inside you. But more than that." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I want to help you fulfill the prophecy that's bound our fates together since before we were born." "Our fates." Kai's smile was soft and devastating. "I'm not just here as a guardian, Lyra. I'm here because 300 years ago, Queen Selene was betrayed on the night before her bonding ceremony. The alpha she was meant to mate with, my ancestor, died trying to protect her. The prophecy says that when the last daughter returns, she'll be bonded to the last son of House Blackthorn." Lyra's breath caught. "You." "Me." His voice was rough with emotion. "I've been searching for you my entire life, following whispers and legends, and the pull of something I couldn't name. And now I understand, it wasn't just duty calling me. It was you." The mark on her wrist pulsed in rhythm with her racing heart, and suddenly Lyra could feel it, a golden thread stretching between them, binding them in ways that transcended the physical world. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was impossible, that she was having some sort of breakdown brought on by stress and grief. But the deeper part of her, the part that had always felt slightly out of place in the modern world, that had always been drawn to the moon and the wild places, that part whispered, finally. "This is all happening too fast," she said, taking a step back. Kai nodded, though his eyes never left hers. "I know. But time is something we don't have much of." His expression darkened. "The mark appearing means the awakening has begun, and that means others will sense it too. Not all of them will be happy about the return of the royal bloodline. Others? The families who carved up Linares territory after Queen Selene's death. The ones who've grown comfortable ruling in your absence." His jaw tightened. "They'll see you as a threat to their power." A chill ran down Lyra's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "Are you saying I'm in danger?" "I'm saying we need to prepare you for what's coming." Kai gestured toward the cottage. "Your grandmother left things for you. Things that will help you understand your heritage and access your power. But first, there's something you need to see." He led her up the porch steps, and as they reached the door, Lyra's mark flared again. The cottage door swung open without either of them touching it, as if the house itself recognized her presence. Inside, everything was exactly as she remembered from her childhood visits. The cozy furniture, the scent of lavender and old books, the feeling of safety and love. But now she noticed things her child's eyes had missed. The wolf motifs carved into the wooden beams, the silver crescents worked into the wallpaper pattern, the way moonlight seemed to gather and intensify around certain objects. "She never stopped hoping you'd return," Kai said softly. "Even when the rest of us began to doubt, she insisted the bloodline would rise again." Lyra trailed her fingers over her grandmother's favorite reading chair, grief and wonder warring in her chest. "How did you know her?" "My pack has been the guardians of House Linares for 15 generations. We've kept the secret, maintained the sacred sites, and waited." He moved to the mantelpiece, where a silver-framed photograph showed a young woman who looked remarkably like Lyra, wearing an elaborate gown and crown. "This is Queen Selene, your great-great-grandmother, many times over." Lyra moved closer, mesmerized. The woman in the photograph had her eyes, her bone structure, even the same stubborn set to her chin. "She's beautiful." She was the most powerful alpha female of her generation. Some say she could speak to the moon itself, could call down its light to heal or defend her people. Kai's voice was reverent. "The stories say she was weeks away from bonding with Alpha Magnus Blackthorn when the betrayal came." "What happened?" Kai's expression darkened. "House Corvina. They were supposed to be allies, but they'd been secretly gathering support to overthrow the monarchy. They invited Queen Selene to what she thought was a peace treaty signing. Instead, they slaughtered her and her entire court, including Magnus." "That's horrible," Lyra breathed. "It shattered the pack structure across the entire northern territories. Without the royal bloodline to unite them, the great houses turned on each other. Wars raged for decades until eventually the survivors scattered or went into hiding." He turned to face her fully. "But the prophecies said that someday, when the packs had grown weak and divided, when ancient enemies began to stir again, the last daughter would return to restore the dynasty." The weight of his words settled on her shoulders like a mantle. "And you think I'm supposed to be this last daughter?" "I don't think it, Lyra. I know it." He gestured to her wrist. "The mark doesn't lie. Neither does this." He reached into his jacket and withdrew something that made Lyra's breath catch, a silver circlet set with a moonstone that seemed to hold captured starlight. Even from across the room, she could feel its power calling to her. "The moon crown," Kai said reverently. "Your grandmother kept it safe all these years, waiting for you." Without conscious thought, Lyra found herself moving toward him, drawn by the crown's otherworldly beauty. As she drew closer, the moonstone began to glow, responding to her presence. "Try it on," Kai urged gently. Lyra hesitated. Putting on the crown felt like accepting a destiny she wasn't sure she was ready for. But the mark on her wrist pulsed insistently, and she could feel something ancient and powerful stirring in her blood. With trembling fingers, she lifted the circlet. The moment it touched her skin, visions flooded her mind, wolves running beneath a full moon, great halls filled with music and laughter, the sensation of power flowing through her veins like liquid starlight. And through it all, the feeling of belonging so intense it brought tears to her eyes. The crown settled onto her head as if it had been made for her, and suddenly the cottage was filled with silver light. Lyra felt power unfurl inside her chest like wings, felt her senses expand and sharpen until she could hear the heartbeat of every creature in the forest, could smell the approach of a storm still hours away. "My queen," Kai whispered, and when she looked at him, she saw him kneeling, head bowed in reverence. But more than that, she felt the golden thread between them strengthen, felt the pull of a bond that transcended lifetimes. This was her mate, her partner, the other half of her soul that had been searching for her across centuries. "Kai," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that hadn't been there before. "What happens now?" He looked up at her, golden eyes blazing with devotion and desire. "Now we prepare for war," he said. "Because the moment you put on that crown, every supernatural creature within 500 miles felt the shift in power. The lost dynasty has returned, and there are those who will do anything to prevent you from claiming your full inheritance." As if summoned by his words, a howl echoed through the mountains, but this one was different from the one she'd heard the night before. This one was full of rage and challenge, and it was answered by a dozen others from different directions. "They're coming," Kai said grimly, rising to his feet. We need to get you somewhere safe while you learn to control your new abilities. But even as fear flickered through her, Lyra felt something else rising, a fierce protectiveness for the people she was apparently destined to lead, and a burning determination to reclaim what had been stolen from her bloodline. "No," she said, and power rang in her voice like struck silver. "I'm done running from who I am. If they want to challenge the rightful queen of the Northern Pax, let them come." The mark on her wrist blazed with triumphant light, and in the distance, thunder rolled across the mountains like the sound of destiny awakening. Chapter 2. The first attack came at dawn. Lyra jolted awake in her grandmother's bed, the moon crown still warm against her temples where she'd fallen asleep wearing it. The mark on her wrist burned like ice and fire, and her newly awakened senses screamed danger. Through the bedroom window, she could see shapes moving in the pre-dawn mist, wolves, but wrong somehow, their eyes glowing red instead of the natural gold or amber she expected. They moved with unnatural coordination, circling the cottage like they were following orders. "Kai," she called out, but there was no answer from the living room where he'd insisted on keeping watch. Fear spiked through her as she crept to the bedroom door. The cottage was silent except for the sound of her own thundering heartbeat. She eased the door open and peered into the main room. Kai was gone. In his place, a silver-haired woman sat in her grandmother's favorite chair, stroking the head of a massive red-eyed wolf that had somehow gotten inside. "Hello, dear," the woman said without looking up. Her voice was cultured, refined, and utterly cold. "I'm Lady Corvina. I believe we have much to discuss." The name hit Lyra like a physical blow. Corvina, the house that had betrayed and murdered Queen Selene. "Where is Kai?" "Safe for now," Lady Corvina said, finally raising her head. She was beautiful in an ageless way, with sharp features and silver eyes that held no warmth. "Though his continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation." The wolf beside her chair growled low, and Lyra noticed the collar around its neck, silver, inscribed with runes that seemed to writhe and shift when she looked at them directly. "Binding collar," Lady Corvina explained, following her gaze. "Very effective for controlling unruly alphas. Young Blackthorn is wearing a similar one at the moment." Rage flared in Lyra's chest, and the moon crown responded, flooding her system with power. The cottage windows rattled, and several of the wolves outside whined and backed away from the building. "Impressive," Lady Corvina said approvingly. "You're stronger than we expected. Selene's power has bred true, it seems." "What do you want?" Lyra demanded. "What we've always wanted, stability. Order. The Northern Territories have been peaceful under our rule for 3 centuries. We've maintained the balance, kept the humans unaware of our existence, prevented the chaos that comes with royal dynasties and their emotional decisions." "You mean you've kept the power for yourselves?" Lady Corvina's smile was sharp as winter. "Power belongs to those strong enough to wield it responsibly. Your ancestor was a romantic fool who nearly exposed our entire species because she valued love over duty." "That's not what happened," Lyra said, though she wasn't entirely sure how she knew that. The knowledge seemed to flow from the crown itself, ancient memories awakening in her blood. "Isn't it?" The older woman stood gracefully, the red-eyed wolf moving to flank her. Selene was planning to mate with Magnus Blackthorn despite the fact that it would have united 2 of the most powerful bloodlines. "Do you have any idea what kind of children that union would have produced? What kind of threat they would have posed to the natural order?" "Children like me," Lyra realized.
"Exactly.
"Which is why we're going to make you the same offer we made her. Abdicate your claim, acknowledge House Corvina's right to rule, and live quietly as a protected bloodline. You'll want for nothing, but you'll never wear that crown in public again." "And if I refuse?" Lady Corvina's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Then you'll suffer the same fate as your ancestor, along with young Blackthorn and anyone else foolish enough to support your claim." The threat hung in the air like a blade. Lyra felt the weight of the crown on her head, felt the power thrumming through her veins, felt the bond with Kai pulling at her heart like a compass needle. I need time to think, she said carefully. You have until moonrise, Lady Corvina said. Choose wisely, little moon. Some legacies are better left buried. She gestured, and the red-eyed wolf padded to the door, which opened without anyone touching it. The other wolves in the yard fell into formation as Lady Corvina walked out, leaving Lyra alone with a terrible choice. But as soon as the Corvina wolves disappeared into the forest, Lyra felt it, a golden pulse along the mate bond, weak but unmistakable. Kai was alive, and he was trying to tell her something. She pressed her hand to her heart, focusing on the connection between them. Images flashed through her mind, a cave system carved with ancient runes, silver chains, and, most importantly, a location, the old mining tunnels in Blackthorn Mountain. Lyra had never been particularly athletic, but her awakened werewolf heritage made her faster and stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. She made it to the mountain in less than an hour, following instincts she didn't know she possessed and the increasingly strong pull of the mate bond. The entrance to the old mines was hidden behind a waterfall, just like something out of her grandmother's fairy tales. But as Lyra stepped through the cascade of water, she realized those hadn't been fairy tales at all. They'd been history lessons disguised as bedtime stories. The tunnels were older than the mining operation that had eventually covered them. Ancient symbols were carved into the stone walls, and moonlight somehow filtered down from above despite the fact that they were deep underground. Her enhanced vision let her navigate the twisting passages easily, following the golden thread in her chest that led unerringly toward Kai. She found him in a natural cavern deep in the mountain's heart, chained with silver that burned angry welts into his skin. But he wasn't alone. 3 other wolves were imprisoned with him, all bearing the distinctive black coat and golden eyes of House Blackthorn. Lyra, Kai breathed as she stepped into the cavern. Relief flooded his features, followed immediately by concern. You shouldn't have come. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap, she said, examining the silver chains. But I wasn't about to leave you here. The chains are spelled, one of the other prisoners said. He was older than Kai, with silver threading through his black hair. Corvina magic. Only royal blood can break them. Lyra looked at the complex runes worked into the metal links. As she focused on them, the moon crown grew warm against her temples, and suddenly she could read the ancient script as easily as English. A binding spell, she murmured. But not just to hold you, to drain your power. Her eyes widened as she understood the full implications. They're using you as batteries. For what? Kai asked. Lyra's blood ran cold as the final pieces clicked into place. To power a suppression field. That's why werewolves have been getting weaker over the past few decades, why so many packs have disbanded. The Corvinas haven't just been ruling, they've been systematically draining the power from every supernatural bloodline to prevent anyone from challenging them. Can you break the chains? The older wolf asked urgently. Lyra placed her hands on the silver links binding Kai. The moment her skin touched the metal, power flared between them, her royal magic meeting the suppression spell in a clash of opposing forces. The runes on the chains began to smoke and crack. But the effort was enormous, like trying to hold back an avalanche with her bare hands. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and the crown grew almost too hot to bear. I can't, she gasped, her strength failing. It's too strong. Yes, you can, Kai said firmly. You're not just breaking chains, Lyra. You're breaking 300 years of tyranny. Every wolf who suffered under Corvina rule is counting on you. I don't know how. The same way Celine would have, the older wolf said. Not with power alone, but with love. That's what they could never understand. Love doesn't weaken us. It makes us infinite. Lyra looked into Kai's golden eyes and saw her entire future there, not just as a queen, but as a woman who'd found the other half of her soul. She thought of her grandmother, who'd spent her entire life keeping the bloodline safe. She thought of all the wolves who'd been weakened and scattered because of Corvina's greed. I love you, she said to Kai, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The mate bond between them blazed like a star, and suddenly the royal power flowing through her doubled, tripled, became something vast and unstoppable. The chains around Kai shattered like glass, and the backlash of freed magic spread through the entire cavern system, breaking every binding spell the Corvinas had laid. The 3 blackthorn wolves shifted to human form as their strength returned, and Lyra saw the family resemblance immediately. All of them had Kai's strong features and golden eyes. "Uncle Marcus," Kai said, embracing the older man. "I thought you were dead." "Would have been, if not for our queen," Marcus said, bowing deeply to Lyra. "Your Majesty, House Blackthorn stands ready to serve." The formal address made something shift inside Lyra's chest. She was no longer just a woman who'd stumbled into her heritage, she was a leader with people depending on her. "How many others are imprisoned?" she asked. "Dozens," Marcus said grimly. "Every major bloodline has had members disappear over the years. The Corvinas have been collecting us like trophies. Then we free them all," Lyra said decisively. "Tonight." But even as she spoke, alarms began echoing through the mountain, harsh, discordant sounds that made her newly sensitive ears ring. "They know we've escaped," Kai said, already shifting into his wolf form. The transformation was beautiful and terrible, human features flowing into something wild and powerful. "Let them come," Lyra said, and the moon crown blazed with silver fire. It's time House Corvina learned what it means to face the rightful queen of the Northern Pax. Chapter 3. The Corvina hunting party reached the mountain just as Lyra and the freed Blackthorn wolves emerged from the cave system. Lady Corvina herself led the charge, mounted on a horse-sized wolf with eyes like burning coals. Behind her came at least 30 other wolves, all bearing the distinctive gray and silver coloring of her house. But they weren't alone. As Lyra watched from the rocky outcropping above the cave entrance, other shapes emerged from the forest, wolves in brown and rust, the colors of House Thornfield, sleek silver wolves that could only be House Silvermoon, and massive wolves with coats like winter storms that bore the markings of House Winterfang. "The Old Alliance," Marcus breathed beside her. "They're forming the coalition that destroyed the royal house." "How many?" Lyra asked. "For major houses, maybe 8 smaller ones," Kai said, his golden eyes tracking the movement below. "Close to 200 wolves total." The odds were overwhelming, but Lyra felt something fierce and bright burning in her chest. These were the families that had carved up her ancestors' kingdom like vultures. They'd grown fat and comfortable on stolen power, never expecting the royal bloodline to return. They were about to learn their mistake. "Your Majesty," Marcus said urgently, "we should retreat. There are safe houses, other loyal bloodlines who will shelter you while we gather our forces." "No," Lyra said firmly. "I'm done hiding. I'm done letting them dictate the terms." She looked out at the assembled enemy forces and felt the moon crown's power singing in her blood. They want to end this the same way they did 3 centuries ago? Fine. But this time, they're facing a queen who knows she's walking into a trap. She stepped to the edge of the outcropping, silver light streaming from the crown like captured moonbeams. Her voice carried across the mountainside, enhanced by royal power until every creature within miles could hear her. "Lady Corvina," she called out, "I reject your offer." The assembled wolves below shifted restlessly at the sound of her voice. Even from a distance, Lyra could see some of them backing away, instinctively recognizing the royal command in her tone. Lady Corvina urged her mount forward, looking up at Lyra with cold fury. "Then you choose death, little moon, just like your ancestor." "My ancestor was betrayed by people she trusted," Lyra replied. "But I know exactly who my enemies are." She raised her hand, and moonlight seemed to gather around her fingers despite the fact that it was still daylight. "I am Lyra, last daughter of House Linares, rightful queen of the Northern Pax. By blood and birthright, I claim dominion over these lands and all who run beneath their skies." The formal challenge sent a ripple of power through the supernatural world like a stone dropped in still water. Every werewolf for hundreds of miles felt it, a thrumming in their bones that spoke of authority and ancient magic. But more than that, it called to them. Lyra felt the response like an echo, dozens, then hundreds of voices raised in recognition. The suppression field that had been slowly draining their strength for generations was broken, and now they remembered what it meant to be truly free. From the forest surrounding the mountain, new shapes began to emerge. These weren't part of the Corvina coalition. These were the scattered remnants of the original royal supporters, the minor houses and lone wolves who had survived centuries of persecution by hiding in the wild places. House Ravencrest, with their distinctive black and silver markings. House Dawnstrider, whose wolves ran with coats like living flame. House Moonwhisper, so pale they seemed made of starlight itself. Impossible, Lady Corvina snarled. We destroyed you all. You scattered us, came a new voice from the forest. A woman stepped into the clearing, tall and regal despite her simple traveling clothes. She shifted fluidly from human to wolf and back again, her coat a stunning mixture of silver and black. But you never destroyed us, Corvina. We've been waiting. Lady Ravencrest, Marcus breathed in recognition. Elena Ravencrest, the woman confirmed, bowing deeply to Lyra. My house stands with the rightful queen. One by one, the other loyal houses declared themselves, their wolves flowing out of the forests like a tide of justice 3 centuries in the making. Soon, the forces were more evenly matched, though the Corvina coalition still held the advantage of organization and unified leadership. Lady Corvina's expression shifted from fury to calculation. You think numbers matter? We've had 300 years to prepare for this day. We know every weakness of the royal bloodline, every flaw in your precious dynasty. She raised her own hand, and dark energy crackled around her fingers. Not the silver light of lunar magic, but something twisted and wrong. Did you really think we'd rely on the old ways forever? We've found new sources of power, Little Moon. Sources your naive ancestor never dreamed of. The corrupted magic struck out like a whip, aimed directly at Lyra's heart. But Kai was already moving, shifting to wolf form mid-leap, and taking the blast meant for her. He hit the ground hard, his magnificent black coat smoking from the impact. Kai. Lyra dropped to her knees beside him, her hands glowing with healing light as she pressed them to his injuries. I'm all right, he managed, though she could see the pain in his golden eyes. But that wasn't werewolf magic, Lyra. That was something else. Lyra looked up at Lady Corvina with new understanding. You've been dealing with demons. The older woman's smile was sharp and cold. When you've ruled for as long as we have, you learn to be pragmatic about your allies. The demon lords are quite reasonable, actually. They want the same thing we do: order, stability, no messy complications from royal bloodlines who think love conquers all. Horror washed over Lyra as the full implications hit her. You've corrupted the entire pack structure. That's why wolves have been getting weaker. You haven't just been draining our power, you've been replacing it with demon energy. Efficiency, Lady Corvina said approvingly. Though I suppose your purest sensibilities are offended. Around the mountain clearing, the loyal wolves were backing away from the Corvina coalition, instinctively recognizing the wrongness of their tainted magic. But the corrupted wolves seemed stronger now, their eyes glowing not with natural fire but with the cold light of the abyss. This ends now, Lyra said, rising to her feet. The moon crown blazed so brightly that shadows fled to the very edges of the clearing. You want to see what royal power really looks like? Fine. She reached deep into the well of magic that had awakened with her bloodline, but instead of drawing on her own strength alone, she opened herself to the mate bond with Kai. His power flowed into hers, wild and fierce and absolutely loyal. Then she reached further, touching the bonds of loyalty and recognition that connected her to every wolf who had acknowledged her as queen. It was like grasping lightning, but she held on, feeling the combined strength of dozens of bloodlines flowing through her. This was what Lady Corvina had never understood. True power didn't come from taking, but from freely given loyalty and love. By moonlight and starfire, Lyra intoned, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. By blood spilled and honor kept, by the bonds that tie pack to pack across all the wild places, I call judgment upon those who have corrupted the sacred covenant. Silver light erupted from her in waves, washing over the assembled wolves like a cleansing tide. Where it touched the loyal houses, they grew stronger, their natural abilities enhanced, and their bonds to each other deepened. But where it touched the corrupted Corvina forces, it burned. The demon energy that had been artificially boosting their power recoiled from the pure lunar magic, like oil from water. Wolves collapsed, howling as the foreign influence was torn from their systems. Lady Corvina herself staggered, her beautiful face contorting with rage and pain. "You don't know what you're doing, you foolish girl. The old ways are dead. The world has moved on." "Then maybe it's time to move it back," Lyra said. The cleansing light reached its peak, and for a moment, the entire mountain was bathed in silver radiance. When it faded, half the Corvina forces were unconscious, the demon corruption purged from their systems. Those still standing looked around in confusion, as if waking from a long dream. But Lady Corvina herself was still on her feet, though her elegant appearance was now twisted with fury. Dark energy writhed around her like living shadow, and her eyes had turned the flat black of the abyss. "If I can't rule," she snarled, her voice layered with harmonics that didn't belong to any earthly throat, "then no one will." She raised both hands, and the air itself began to tear open, revealing a glimpse of something vast and horrible beyond the boundaries of the world. "A demon gate," Lady Ravencrest shouted in horror. "She's opening a portal to the lower realms. Can you stop it?" Kai asked, struggling to his feet beside Lyra. Lyra looked at the growing tear in reality and felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a mantle. This was what it meant to be queen, not just the power and the crown, but the duty to protect her people no matter the cost. "Not alone," she said. "But I don't have to be alone, do I?" She looked around at the assembled loyal houses, at Kai and his family, at all the wolves who had answered her call, and acknowledged her right to rule. "Elena," she called to Lady Ravencrest. "Your house specialized in barrier magic, didn't they?" "For 15 generations, Elena confirmed. "Marcus, the Blackthorn gift is raw power, correct?" "The strongest in the Northern Territories," he said proudly. Lyra nodded, then raised her voice, so all could hear. "Then let's show Lady Corvina what happens when the royal houses stand united. Form the circle." Without hesitation, the loyal wolves moved into the ancient formation their ancestors had used in the great rituals of the past. Elena and the Ravencrest wolves took the cardinal directions, their silver energy weaving protective barriers around the growing portal. The Blackthorn family channeled raw power into the working, while the other houses contributed their unique gifts: Dawnstrider fire, Moonwhisper stealth, Winterfang endurance. And at the center of it all, Lyra stood with the moon crown blazing like a captured star, weaving all their individual strengths into something greater than the sum of its parts. "Now," she said, and every wolf in the circle poured their power into the royal conduit. The combined magic of the ancient bloodlines struck the demon portal like a silver tsunami. The tear in reality collapsed with a sound like the world's largest bell being struck, and the backlash sent Lady Corvina flying backward to hit the mountain face with bone-crushing force. When the echoes died away, the clearing was silent except for the sound of heavy breathing and the whisper of wind through the pines. Lady Corvina lay unconscious against the rocks, the demonic corruption finally purged from her system. Around the clearing, the wolves of her coalition were picking themselves up, looking lost and confused but no longer tainted with abyssal power. "It's over," Kai said wonderingly. But Lyra shook her head, feeling the weight of what came next. No. This was just the beginning. Chapter 4. 3 days after the battle at Blackthorn Mountain, Lyra stood in the ruins of Linares Castle, the ancient seat of her bloodline. The massive structure had been built into the mountainside itself, its towers reaching toward the sky like stone fingers. But 3 centuries of abandonment had taken their toll. Walls crumbled, towers had collapsed, and vines covered most of the remaining stonework. Yet as she walked through the debris-strewn Great Hall, Lyra could feel the power that still lingered in these stones. Her ancestors had ruled from this place for over 1,000 years, and their legacy was written into the very foundation of the castle. It's magnificent, Elena Ravencrest said, running her hand along a wall carved with intricate wolf motifs. Even in ruins, you can feel the majesty it once held. Lyra nodded, though part of her felt overwhelmed by the sheer scale of what needed to be restored. It wasn't just the physical structure, it was everything the castle represented. The united pacts, the old alliances, the careful balance between the supernatural world and the human one. Your Majesty, Marcus Blackthorne approached, his expression troubled. We've completed the initial survey. The damage is extensive, but not irreparable. However, we've found something you need to see. He led her through a maze of collapsed corridors to what had once been the castle's heart, the throne room of stars. Here, moonlight filtered through a circular opening in the ceiling, illuminating a raised dais where the moon throne had once stood. The throne itself was gone, but carved into the dais were symbols that made Lyra's breath catch. They were similar to the marks on her wrist, but far more complex, a complete genealogical map of the royal bloodline, stretching back to the very first werewolf queen. The Chronicle of Blood, she whispered, knowledge flowing from the moon crown. Every queen added her mark when she took the throne. But it was what lay beyond the symbols that had captured Marcus's attention. At the very back of the dais, partially hidden by fallen stones, was another portal. But this one wasn't demonic. This one thrummed with natural magic, its edges inscribed with runes of protection and binding. What is it? Kai asked, appearing at her side. He'd been leading the effort to secure the castle's perimeter, making sure no hostile forces could surprise them while they worked. A gateway to the sacred grove, Elena said in an awed whisper. I thought it was just legend. Lyra approached the portal cautiously. Unlike Lady Corvina's demon gate, this one felt warm and welcoming, like stepping into sunlight after a long winter. Through its shimmering surface, she could see hints of a forest unlike any in the mortal world, trees with silver bark and leaves that seemed to be made of captured starlight. The heart of werewolf magic, she breathed, where the first queen received her blessing from the moon itself. The portal's been dormant for 3 centuries, Marcus observed. Ever since Queen Selene died, Lyra finished. She looked down at the mark on her wrist, which was now pulsing in rhythm with the gateway's energy. It's been waiting for the bloodline to return. Without quite meaning to, she stepped forward and placed her hand on the portal's edge. The moment her skin touched the ancient stone, visions flooded her mind, not of the past this time, but of potential futures. She saw herself standing in the Great Hall, but restored to its former glory, filled with representatives from every pack in the Northern Territories. She saw Kai beside her, wearing the ceremonial armor of the royal consort, their children playing in gardens that bloomed with impossible beauty. But she also saw darker possibilities, the castle in flames, the loyal houses scattered again, herself standing alone against enemies that seemed to multiply like shadows. The future isn't fixed, a voice said, and Lyra jerked her head up to see a woman standing just inside the portal. She was tall and regal, with Lyra's own features, but silver hair that moved like liquid moonlight. But some paths are more likely than others. Queen Selene, Lyra breathed. Her ancestor smiled sadly. I've been waiting a long time to meet you, last daughter, to see if you would be strong enough to complete what I began. The portal. Is this real, or am I having a vision? Both, Selene said, stepping fully into the throne room. The sacred grove exists between the mortal world and the realm of pure magic. From here, I've watched the bloodline dwindle, seen our people scattered and weakened. But I also saw the potential for restoration. She gestured to Kai and the others, who were watching the exchange with awe and reverence. You've already done more than I ever managed, child. You've united the loyal houses, purged the corruption from the pack structure, and awakened the old magic. But the hardest work is yet to come. Rebuilding, Lyra said. More than that. Selene's expression grew serious. Creating something new. The old kingdom fell because it was too rigid, too focused on bloodline purity and ancient traditions. The new dynasty or founding must be different, stronger because it embraces change rather than fearing it. Lyra felt the weight of that responsibility, but also a growing certainty. "What do you need me to do?" "Accept the full blessing of your heritage," Selene said. "Not just the power, but the wisdom of every queen who came before you. Are you ready?" Lyra looked back at her friends and allies, at Kai, whose golden eyes held nothing but love and support, at the wolves who had risked everything to answer her call. Then she looked at the ruined castle around her and imagined it restored, not just to its former glory, but to something even greater. "I'm ready," she said. Selene smiled and placed her hands on Lyra's shoulders. The moment they touched, power flooded through her. Not just Selene's magic, but the accumulated strength and wisdom of every werewolf queen stretching back to the beginning of their kind. Lyra saw the first queen receiving her blessing directly from the moon goddess, felt the love and sacrifice of hundreds of rulers who had given their lives for their people, understood the delicate balance between power and responsibility that defined true leadership. But more than that, she felt their approval. Each queen added her voice to the chorus of support, welcoming Lyra not as an heir to a dead dynasty, but as the founder of something entirely new. When the visions faded, the moon crown had transformed. It was still silver and set with moonstones, but now it pulsed with internal light, and additional symbols had appeared around its band, marks representing not just the old bloodlines, but new ones that would rise in the coming age. "The crown of all seasons," Selene said reverently. "It hasn't been seen since the very first queen. You truly are the bridge between what was and what will be." Lyra felt the difference immediately. Her connection to the pack bonds had deepened exponentially. She could sense every werewolf in the Northern Territories, feel their hopes and fears and dreams. But rather than overwhelming her, it felt like coming home to a family she'd never known she was missing. "What happens to you now?" she asked her ancestor. "I return to the grove to rest with the other queens," Selene said, already beginning to fade. "Our time is done, child. This is your age now." She paused at the portal's edge. "But remember, the greatest power a queen can possess isn't magic or authority. It's the wisdom to know when to lead and when to listen." With that, she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of moonflowers and the echo of ancient wisdom. Lyra turned back to find every wolf in the throne room kneeling, their heads bowed in reverence. The transformed crown blazed with silver fire, and she could feel their loyalty like a warm current in her blood. "Rise," she said, her voice carrying new harmonics of authority and compassion. "We have work to do." Over the next several hours, as word of the transformation spread, wolves began arriving from all over the territory. They came singly and in small groups, drawn by the call of the newly awakened royal magic. Many were descendants of the original loyal houses, carrying bloodlines that had been hidden for centuries. Others were lone wolves who had never known they had royal heritage until the suppression field fell. Elena Ravencrest served as Lyra's advisor, helping her navigate the complex politics of bloodline recognition and territorial claims. Marcus Blackthorn organized the military aspects, ensuring that the growing community was protected from any remaining Corvina loyalists. And Kai was her anchor in the storm of responsibility and power. When the weight of leadership threatened to overwhelm her, his steady presence reminded her that she wasn't carrying this burden alone. "How many now?" she asked him as they stood on the castle's highest remaining tower, looking out over the valley where dozens of temporary camps had sprung up. 300 and rising, he said. "Word is spreading through the pack networks faster than we anticipated. There are reports of wolves coming out of hiding as far away as Alaska and the Pacific Northwest." Lyra nodded, feeling each new arrival like a pulse in her enhanced awareness. "They're not just coming home, they're coming alive. I can feel their power returning as the corruption leaves their systems." "Any regrets?" Kai asked softly. She considered the question seriously. A week ago, she'd been a museum curator living a quiet life in Chicago. Now she was a werewolf queen responsible for thousands of lives and the future of an entire supernatural nation. "No," she said finally. "This is what I was meant for. What we were meant for." Kai smiled and pulled her close, careful not to disturb the crown. Speaking of that, when do you want to hold the bonding ceremony? The packs are expecting it, and honestly, the romantic in me is getting impatient. Lyra laughed, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders.
Soon.
But first, we need to deal with the practical matters. Food, shelter, organizing the bloodlines, establishing trade relationships with the human world. She trailed off, the list of responsibilities seeming endless. Tomorrow's problems, Kai said firmly. Tonight, let's just be us. As if responding to his words, the moon emerged from behind the clouds, bathing the ruined castle in silver light. Throughout the valley below, wolves lifted their voices in a howl of welcome and celebration, not the harsh challenge cries of earlier, but songs of joy and homecoming. Lyra felt the sound resonate in her bones, felt the connections between herself and her people strengthen with each voice added to the chorus. This was what Celine had meant about the new dynasty being different. It wasn't built on fear or rigid hierarchy, but on love and freely given loyalty. Listen, she said to Kai, tilting her head toward the valley. He was quiet for a moment, his enhanced hearing picking up the nuances she meant. They're singing the old songs. I didn't know anyone still remembered them. They remember now, Lyra said. The blood remembers everything, even when the mind forgets. As they stood together on the ancient stones, watching their people celebrate below, Lyra felt the final pieces of her transformation settle into place. She was no longer just a woman who had stumbled into her heritage. She was Queen Lyra of House Linares, founder of the new dynasty, protector of the pack bonds. But more than that, she was home. Chapter 5. 2 weeks after the battle at Blackthorn Mountain, Lyra stood in the newly cleared Great Hall of Linares Castle, facing her first true test as queen. Representatives from every major pack in North America had arrived for the conclave of recognition, the ancient ceremony where bloodlines would formally acknowledge her right to rule. But not all of them had come to offer allegiance. You claim the moon crown by right of blood, said Alpha Victor Ironwood, his massive frame making even the restored throne room seem smaller. The Ironwood pack controlled territory stretching from the Canadian Rockies down into Montana, and their wolves were known for their size and aggression. But blood alone doesn't make a ruler. Strength does. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled crowd. Lyra could feel the tension in the room like a living thing. Some packs were genuinely supportive, others remained skeptical, and a few were clearly hostile. The old ways are dead, added Alpha Morgana Stormwind, her ice-blue eyes fixed on Lyra with calculating coldness. The modern packs don't need a queen. We've survived just fine without the monarchy for 3 centuries. Elena Ravencrest stepped forward, her diplomatic training evident in her composed response. The survival you speak of came at the cost of our heritage, our power, and our unity. How many packs have disbanded in the last century? How many bloodlines have been lost? Natural selection, Victor growled. The weak fall away, the strong survive. That's the way of the wolf. That's the way of extinction, Lyra said, finally speaking. Her voice carried the authority of the transformed crown, but she kept her tone measured, respectful. I've seen the records, Alpha Victor. Your own pack has lost 40% of its membership in the last 50 years. Young wolves leaving for human cities, bloodlines thinning, children born without the ability to shift. Victor's eyes flashed dangerously. You dare. I dare to speak the truth, Lyra interrupted, rising from the moon throne that had been painstakingly restored to the dais. The crown of all seasons blazed with silver fire, casting dancing shadows on the ancient stone walls. The suppression field the Corvinas maintained didn't just drain our power, it broke the connections that bind pack to pack, generation to generation. Without those bonds, we're not wolves anymore. We're just predators pretending at civilization. Pretty words, Morgana said coolly. But words don't prove worthiness. If you truly believe you can unite the packs, then prove it the old way. A chill ran down Lyra's spine. She knew what Morgana was suggesting, the trial of dominance, an ancient rite where challenges to royal authority were settled through ritualized combat. I invoke the right of trial, Victor said formally, his voice echoing through the great hall. Let the pretender prove her strength against those she would rule. The assembled wolves fell silent. Even those who supported Lyra looked troubled. The trial of dominance hadn't been invoked in over 4 centuries, and the last time it had been used, it had resulted in the death of a potential heir. Kai stepped forward from his position beside the throne, his golden eyes blazing with protective fury. "The queen has nothing to prove to you," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable rumble of an alpha ready to fight. But Lyra placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It's all right," she said softly. Then, louder, so all could hear, "I accept the trial." The words seemed to hit the assembly like a physical blow. Elena looked stricken. Marcus Blackthorn's face had gone pale, and even some of the hostile alphas seemed surprised that she'd agreed so readily. "Your Majesty," Elena said urgently, "you don't understand the implications. The trial isn't just combat, it's a test of every aspect of leadership. Strategy, wisdom, physical prowess, magical ability, and the strength of your bloodline connections. Many die in the attempt." "Then it's a good thing I don't plan to die," Lyra said with more confidence than she felt. She looked out at the assembled crowd, reading the mix of emotions in their faces. "But I understand why this is necessary. You've lived without a queen for 3 centuries. Why should you trust someone you barely know, just because she wears an ancient crown?" She descended from the throne, moving to stand in the center of the great hall. "The trial will prove whether I'm worthy to lead, or whether the age of the royal bloodlines truly is over. Either way, you'll have your answer." Victor's smile was sharp and predatory. "The trial consists of 3 challenges, as laid down in the old laws. First, the challenge of the mind, a test of strategy and wisdom. Second, the challenge of the body, physical combat against a champion of our choosing. Third, the challenge of the spirit, a test of your connection to the pack bonds that unite our people. And if I fail? If you fail any challenge, you forfeit the crown and acknowledge that the monarchy has no place in the modern world," Morgana said. "The packs will return to self-governance, and the royal bloodlines will be dissolved." The stakes were higher than Lyra had imagined, but she felt the weight of all her ancestors' hopes and sacrifices pressing down on her. This was what she'd been born for. Not just to wear a crown, but to prove that the bonds between werewolves were stronger than politics or fear. "I accept these terms," she said formally. "When do we begin?" "Now," Victor said. "The challenge of the mind first. You have 1 hour to solve a problem that has plagued the packs for generations." He gestured to a massive table that had been brought into the hall, covered with maps, documents, and other materials. "The Yellowstone territories," he explained. 3 packs claim the same hunting grounds: Ironwood, Stormwind, and Golden Crest. They've been feuding for 50 years, and twice it's erupted into open warfare. The human authorities are starting to notice the unusual wildlife activity in the region. Solve it, and you pass the first trial." Lyra approached the table, her mind racing. She could see the problem immediately. The 3 territories overlapped in a complex pattern that left valuable resources contested between multiple groups. Traditional solutions would involve forcing one pack to cede territory to the others, but that would only breed resentment and future conflict. She studied the maps, cross-referencing them with population data, resource surveys, and historical pack movements. The crown seemed to pulse with each connection she made, ancient wisdom flowing through her enhanced awareness. "The problem isn't the territory," she said after 20 minutes of intense study. "It's the assumption that territories must be exclusive." She began sketching on a piece of parchment, outlining a new arrangement. "Seasonal rotation," she explained to the watching assembly. "Each pack gets exclusive access to different parts of the territory during different times of year, corresponding to natural migration patterns and resource availability. Ironwood gets the northern ranges during winter when their cold weather adaptations give them an advantage. Stormwind takes the high peaks during summer storms when their lightning affinity is strongest. Golden Crest gets the river valleys during salmon runs." Victor frowned, studying her proposal. "And during the transition periods?" "Shared hunts," Lyra said immediately. "Joint patrols, interpack cooperation. Instead of 3 separate territories, You create one extended territory managed by a council of 3 alphas. That's... Morgana looked genuinely surprised. That's actually brilliant. It addresses resource scarcity, reduces territorial conflict, and strengthens interpack bonds. More than that, Elena added, studying the proposal with growing excitement. It creates a model for other disputed territories across the continent. This could revolutionize pack relations. Victor looked less pleased with the solution, but he nodded grudgingly. The challenge of the mind is satisfied. You've shown wisdom beyond your years, young queen. But before Lyra could feel relieved, he continued. Now comes the challenge of the body. As the challenger, I claim the right to name your opponent. He gestured toward the great hall's entrance, where a figure emerged from the shadows, tall, heavily muscled, with scars crisscrossing his arms and face. Lyra's enhanced senses immediately identified him as a warrior of immense skill and experience. Gunnar Ironwood, Victor announced. My eldest son, undefeated in single combat for 12 years. Kai stepped forward again, his protective instincts clearly warring with respect for Lyra's authority. This is madness. She's barely had her powers for a month. Which is exactly why this trial is necessary, Morgana said coldly. A queen who can't protect herself can't protect her people. Lyra looked at Gunnar, seeing not just an opponent, but a test of everything she'd learned about her new abilities. The young man's posture was respectful but confident. He didn't want to hurt her, but he wouldn't hold back either. The rules, she asked. Combat until submission or incapacitation, Victor replied. No weapons, no interference from outside parties. Wolf form or human form, as you choose. Lyra nodded and began to remove the crown of all seasons, but Elena stopped her. Your Majesty, the crown is part of your royal regalia. You're permitted to wear it during the trial. That was encouraging, at least. Lyra could feel the crown's power thrumming through her, enhancing her natural abilities and connecting her to the strength of all her ancestors. Gunnar stepped into the center of the hall, rolling his shoulders to loosen them. I'll try not to hurt you too badly, Your Majesty, he said with a respectful nod. I appreciate that, Lyra replied, though she was already calculating angles and distances, her enhanced reflexes mapping possible attack patterns. The fight began without formal announcement. Gunnar simply shifted to wolf form and charged, his massive gray form moving with surprising speed for something so large. Lyra had perhaps a second to decide her response. Human form would give her better manual dexterity and the ability to use complex tactics, but wolf form would provide raw power and instinctive combat skills. She chose a third option. Instead of shifting fully to wolf form, she called on her royal heritage to partially transform, allowing her human intelligence and reasoning to remain while gaining enhanced speed, strength, and reflexes. It was a technique that required enormous control, and she'd never attempted it in combat before. Gunnar's charge met empty air as Lyra flowed aside with inhuman grace, her partially extended claws leaving shallow furrows in his flank as she passed. The big wolf spun with trained efficiency, but she was already moving again, using her smaller size and enhanced agility to stay ahead of his attacks. But Gunnar was far more experienced than she was. After the first few exchanges, he began to anticipate her movements, cutting off escape routes and forcing her into increasingly desperate defensive maneuvers. A powerful swipe from his claws sent her tumbling across the stone floor, and she felt ribs crack from the impact. The assembled wolves were utterly silent, watching their potential queen fight for her life against one of the most dangerous warriors in North America. Lyra rolled to her feet, tasting blood. The partial transformation was taking enormous energy to maintain, and she was beginning to tire. But as Gunnar prepared for another charge, she felt something new stirring in her chest, not just her own power, but the strength of every wolf in the hall who supported her claim. The pack bonds, she realized. They weren't just connections, they were sources of shared strength. She reached out through those bonds, not taking power from her supporters, but borrowing their skills. Marcus Blackthorn's tactical expertise, Elena Ravencrest's defensive techniques, even Kai's fierce protective instincts. The knowledge flowed into her like a river, centuries of collective werewolf combat experience suddenly at her disposal. When Gunnar charged again, she was ready. Instead of dodging, she met his attack head-on, using a combination of techniques that left him completely off balance. A move from the Ravencrest school redirected his momentum, a Blackthorn power strike to his shoulder spun him sideways, and a finishing technique that belonged to no modern pack, but had been used by the Royal Guard centuries ago sent him crashing to the floor. He tried to rise, but Lyra was already there, one hand on his throat in the ritual position of dominance. Her eyes blazed with silver fire, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of every werewolf queen who had come before her. "Yield," she said simply. Gunnar looked into her eyes for a long moment, then slowly shifted back to human form. "I yield," he said formally. "The challenge of the body is satisfied." The great hall erupted in a mixture of cheers and stunned silence. Even Victor looked impressed, though he tried to hide it. "2 challenges completed," he said. "But the hardest remains. The challenge of the spirit will test not just your individual power, but your ability to truly unite the packs under your rule." Lyra straightened, feeling the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders like a familiar cloak. "What must I do?" Morgana stepped forward, her ice-blue eyes glittering with something that might have been anticipation. "You must enter the dreaming and speak with the first wolf, the ancestor spirit from whom all werewolves descend. If she accepts you as her heir, the trial is complete. If not, I die," Lyra finished. "The dreaming doesn't forgive weakness," Victor confirmed. "Many have tried to reach the first wolf. Most never return." Lyra looked around the hall at all the faces watching her, supporters and skeptics alike, all waiting to see if she truly was worthy of the crown she wore. "How do I begin?" she asked. Chapter 6. The ancient ritual circle had been carved into the bedrock beneath Linares Castle, hidden for centuries behind layers of stone and silence. As Lyra descended the spiral stairs, torch flames cast dancing shadows on walls covered with the oldest werewolf pictographs known to exist. "The dreaming isn't like normal sleep," Elena explained, her voice echoing in the underground chamber. "It's a spiritual realm where the boundaries between past, present, and future blur together. Time moves differently there. You might experience days while only minutes pass in the real world, or the reverse." The ritual circle itself was breathtaking, an intricate mandala of silver inlaid into black stone, surrounded by alcoves containing artifacts that predated written history. At the center lay a raised platform covered with wolf pelts that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. "These belong to the first pack," Marcus said reverently, gesturing to the pelts. "The original 13 wolves who received the blessing of transformation from the moon goddess herself." Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground chamber's cool air. "What exactly am I walking into?" "No one knows for certain," Victor admitted. "The experiences are different for everyone. Some face trials of combat, others solve ancient riddles. A few encounter their own deepest fears made manifest." "And the first wolf?" "She appears when she chooses to," Morgana said. "If she judges you worthy, she'll grant you the blessing that confirms your right to rule all werewolves. If not," she shrugged eloquently. Kai stepped closer, his golden eyes reflecting the torchlight. "I should go with you." Lyra shook her head. "This is something I have to do alone." She touched his face gently, feeling the mate bond between them pulse with warmth and support. "But knowing you're here gives me strength." She moved to the center of the circle and lay down on the ancient pelts. The moment her body touched the transformed fur, power began flowing through her. Not her own power, but something far older and wilder. "Remember," Elena called as Lyra's eyes began to close. "The dreaming responds to will and intention. Stay focused on your purpose, and don't let yourself be distracted by illusions." The world faded around her, and Lyra felt herself falling through layers of consciousness, past the boundaries of ordinary reality into something vast and primal. When awareness returned, she was standing in a forest unlike any she'd ever seen. The trees reached impossible heights, their trunks wide enough to house entire villages. Moonlight filtered through the canopy in silver beams, and the air thrummed with magic so thick she could taste it on her tongue. But she wasn't alone. Figures emerged from between the massive tree trunks, wolves of every size and color, their eyes glowing with intelligence that spoke of human souls trapped in animal forms. As they drew closer, Lyra realized she could see through them slightly, as if they were made of moonlight and memory. "The lost ones," she whispered, understanding flowing through her. These were werewolves who had died in the dreaming, their spirits bound to this place by unfinished business or unfulfilled oaths. One of the spirit wolves approached, larger than the others, its coat a mixture of silver and black that reminded her painfully of her grandmother. When it spoke, its voice echoed directly in her mind. "You seek the first wolf," it said. "But why should the dead aid the living? What have the waking wolves done for us?" Lyra felt the weight of the question, understanding that this was part of the trial. "You're still part of our people," she said aloud, her voice carrying clearly in the ethereal forest. "Death doesn't break the pack bonds. It transforms them." "Pretty words," another spirit growled. "But the living have forgotten us. Our names, our deeds, our sacrifices, all lost to time." "Then help me remember," Lyra said, moving closer to the ghostly pack. "Help me restore the connections that bind all wolves, living and dead, into one eternal family." The spirits looked at each other, some nodding slowly. The first wolf that had spoken stepped forward again. "You would honor the dead, as well as rule the living?" "I would honor all who came before, so that their wisdom guides those who come after," Lyra replied. The spirit wolf's form began to solidify slightly. "Then we will aid your passage. But beware, the path to the first wolf leads through the Valley of Broken Dreams, where every werewolf who ever failed in their duty relives their moment of shame for eternity." As if summoned by the warning, the forest around them began to shift and change. The mighty trees faded, replaced by a stark landscape of gray stone and swirling mist. In the distance, Lyra could see figures moving through the haze, werewolves trapped in endless loops of regret and self-recrimination. She began walking forward, guided by instinct and the pull of something vast and ancient ahead of her. As she passed through the valley, fragments of the trapped soul's experiences washed over her. A young alpha who had led his pack into an ambush, watching them die because of his overconfidence. A mother who had chosen her human lover over her werewolf children, leaving them to face the world alone. An elder who had sold out his pack's location to human hunters in exchange for protection from a rival bloodline. Each story hit her like a physical blow, and Lyra began to understand why so many who entered the dreaming never returned. The weight of every werewolf failure in history was concentrated here, a testament to the consequences of poor leadership and broken trust. But instead of being crushed by the collective guilt, Lyra felt something else rising in her chest: compassion. These souls weren't evil, just flawed. They'd made mistakes, chosen poorly in moments of crisis, let fear or pride override their better judgment. "I see you," she said, her voice carrying across the valley. "I see your pain, your regret, your desire to make amends. And I promise that if I prove worthy to lead, I won't forget the lessons your failures have taught." The trapped souls paused in their endless cycles of remorse, turning toward her with expressions of desperate hope. "Your mistakes don't define you," she continued, power flowing through her voice. "They're part of the wisdom that will help future generations choose better. Let your pain have purpose." One by one, the tortured spirits began to fade, not into nothingness, but into points of light that rose toward the eternal moon overhead. They were finally free, their suffering transformed into hard-won wisdom that would guide future leaders. As the last soul found peace, the Valley of Broken Dreams dissolved around her, replaced by something that made her breath catch in her throat. She stood on the shore of a vast lake that reflected not water, but liquid starlight. In the center of the lake rose an island covered with silver trees that sang in harmonious voices when the wind touched their leaves. And there, beneath the largest tree, sat a figure that could only be the first wolf. She was enormous, larger than any natural wolf, with a coat that seemed to contain all the colors of moonlight and shadow. Her eyes were ancient beyond measure, filled with the wisdom of millennia and the power that had given birth to their entire species. Lyra began to walk across the starlight lake, her feet finding solid footing on what should have been liquid light. As she drew closer to the island, she felt the presence of every werewolf who had ever lived pressing in around her, not as ghosts or spirits, but as part of a vast, interconnected tapestry of souls. When she reached the island, the first wolf raised her massive head and looked directly into Lyra's eyes. "So," the ancient being said, her voice containing harmonics that resonated in Lyra's bones. "Another comes seeking to claim dominion over my children. Tell me, little queen, what makes you different from all the others who have stood before me?" "Nothing," Lyra said honestly, and the first wolf's ears pricked with surprise. "I'm no more worthy than Queen Selene was, or any of the other rulers who came before me. I make mistakes, I have moments of doubt. I'm still learning what it means to lead. Then why should I grant you the blessing of true authority?" Lyra took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everyone counting on her, not just the wolves in the castle above, but every member of their species who needed strong leadership in the challenges ahead. "Because I understand that ruling isn't about being perfect," she said. "It's about being willing to learn, to listen, to put the good of the pack above personal desires. I've seen what happens when leaders rule through fear or self-interest. I've felt the damage that centuries of division and corruption have done to our people." She gestured back toward the way she'd come, thinking of the spirits she'd helped find peace. "Every failure teaches us something valuable, but only if we're humble enough to learn from it. I want to be the kind of leader who doesn't repeat the mistakes of the past, but who builds on the hard-won wisdom of those who came before." The first wolf was silent for a long moment, her ancient eyes seeming to look straight through to Lyra's soul. "And what of love?" she asked finally. "Your ancestor Selene was criticized for putting her heart before her duty. Do you believe love makes a leader weak?" Lyra thought of Kai, waiting for her in the world above. She thought of the mate bond that connected them, the loyalty she felt for the wolves who had supported her, the protective instincts that made her willing to risk everything for her people. "Love is what makes leadership meaningful," she said. "Without it, we're just tyrants with prettier crowns." Selene's love for Magnus didn't make her weak. It made her fight harder to protect the future they wanted to build together. "My love for Kai doesn't distract me from my duties. It reminds me why those duties matter." "Show me," the first wolf commanded. Suddenly, Lyra was back in the castle's great hall, but it was different, filled with hostile wolves, Kai lying bloody and broken at Victor's feet, Elena and Marcus chained with silver bonds that burned their skin. "Choose," Victor snarled, his form shifting and growing until he towered over her like a nightmare made flesh. "Save your mate or save your supporters. You can't protect them all, little queen. Love makes you weak, because it forces you to choose." For a moment, terror froze Lyra's blood. This was her deepest fear made manifest, being forced to choose between the people she cared about, failing as a leader because her heart was divided. But then she remembered the lesson of the Valley of Broken Dreams. Fear of failure was just another trap, another way to be paralyzed by doubt. "I refuse to choose," she said, power blazing through her voice. "Love doesn't make me weak. It makes me fight harder for everyone. And I won't accept a reality where protecting the people I care about means sacrificing others." She reached out through the pack bonds, not just to her immediate allies but to every werewolf in the vision, even the hostile ones. Instead of trying to dominate or defeat them, she offered connection, understanding, the possibility of unity. "We're all part of the same family," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the transformed hall. "Every wolf here is someone else's mate, child, parent, friend. Their pain matters as much as mine does." The vision began to shift and change, the hostile expressions softening into confusion, then recognition, then hope. Even Victor's monstrous form began to shrink back to normal proportions. "This is what love as a leader means," Lyra continued. "Not playing favorites or being blinded by personal attachment, but caring so much about the well-being of your people that you'll risk everything to find solutions that protect everyone. The false reality dissolved around her, and she was back on the Starlight Island with the first wolf, who was now looking at her with something like approval. Wisdom beyond your years, the ancient being murmured, and the heart to match your heritage. Very well, last daughter of the royal bloodlines. I grant you the blessing of the first pack. The first wolf rose to her feet and padded closer, her massive form radiating power that made the air itself electric. When she touched her nose to Lyra's forehead, energy exploded through every cell of her body. But this wasn't painful. It was like coming home to a family she'd never known she was missing. Suddenly, Lyra could feel every werewolf in existence, from the most powerful alphas to the smallest children just learning to shift. She felt their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future. More than that, she felt the presence of every werewolf who had ever lived, their accumulated wisdom and experience flowing into her like a vast river of knowledge. She was connected not just to the present, but to the entire history of their species. You are no longer just queen of the northern packs, the first wolf said, her voice now warm with maternal pride. You are the alpha of alphas, the speaker for all who run beneath the moon. Use this gift wisely, my child. Our people have waited long for a leader worthy of their trust. The dreaming began to fade around her, and Lyra felt herself rising back toward consciousness. But just before the island disappeared entirely, the first wolf spoke once more. Remember, true strength comes not from standing alone at the top, but from lifting others up to stand beside you. Build bridges, not walls. Create connections, not divisions. This is the way of the true alpha. Chapter 7. Lyra's eyes opened in the ritual chamber to find every person in the room kneeling, their heads bowed in reverence. The crown of all seasons blazed so brightly that it cast silver shadows on the ancient stone walls, and she could feel power flowing through her like liquid starlight. But more than that, she could feel them, not just the people in the chamber, but every werewolf across the continent. The blessing of the first wolf had opened connections that transcended distance, creating a network of bonds that united their entire species. Rise, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in werewolf souls. All of you, please rise. Victor was the first to lift his head, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never expected, genuine respect mixed with a touch of fear. The trial is complete, he said formally. The first wolf has spoken. You are recognized as the true queen of all werewolves. But even as the assembly rose to their feet, Lyra felt something troubling in the web of connections now open to her. Distant distress signals, packs in danger, ancient enemies stirring in response to the shift in supernatural power. The recognition comes at a cost, she said, addressing the gathered alphas. I can feel it through the bonds. Other creatures have sensed the change. Vampires, fae, demons that escaped during the Corvina conflict. They know the werewolves have united under strong leadership again, and some of them see that as a threat. Morgana's ice-blue eyes sharpened. What kind of threats? Lyra closed her eyes, sorting through the flood of information flowing through her enhanced awareness. 3 vampire covens are mobilizing in the Eastern Territories. A fae court has closed its borders and is preparing for war. And something old and angry is stirring in the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest, something that remembers the last werewolf queen and didn't approve of her rule. The Ancient Ones, Marcus breathed. I thought they were legends. Everything's legend until it tries to kill you, Victor said grimly. What are our orders, Your Majesty? The formal address still felt strange, but Lyra was beginning to understand the weight of responsibility that came with it. She wasn't just making decisions for herself anymore. She was charting the course for an entire species. We prepare, she said decisively. But not for war, for diplomacy. The old conflicts between supernatural species were based on fear and misunderstanding. We have a chance to build something better. She looked around the chamber, meeting each alpha's eyes. I want envoys sent to every major supernatural faction. Not warriors or spies, but diplomats. Representatives who can speak for the new werewolf nation and negotiate treaties based on mutual respect rather than fear. And if diplomacy fails? Morgana asked. Lyra's smile was sharp as winter moonlight. Then they'll learn why werewolves ruled the supernatural world for so long. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity as the assembled alphas began planning for the challenges ahead. But throughout it all, Lyra found her attention drawn to Kai, who had remained unusually quiet during the post-trial discussions. When the formal meetings finally ended and they had a moment alone together in the restored royal chambers, she confronted him about it. "What's wrong?" she asked, settling beside him on the couch that faced the chamber's massive windows. Below them, the lights of the growing werewolf community twinkled in the mountain valley like fallen stars. Kai was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Everything's changing so fast," he said finally. "A month ago, you were a museum curator who didn't even know werewolves existed. Now you're the queen of our entire species, connected to every pack on the continent." Lyra felt a chill of understanding. "You're worried I'm changing too much, that the power is making me into someone different. Aren't you?" he asked softly. "When you spoke in the chamber tonight, your voice carried harmonics that made every wolf in the room want to submit. Your eyes glow with silver fire. You can feel the thoughts and emotions of thousands of people simultaneously." She reached for his hand, relieved when he didn't pull away. "The power is real," she admitted, "but it doesn't change who I am inside. I'm still the same person who fell in love with you the moment our eyes met. I still get nervous before important meetings, still worry about making the right decisions, still need your strength to balance my own." "Do you?" Kai's voice was barely a whisper. "Need me, I mean, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you could rule the supernatural world single-handed." The pain in his voice cut through her heart like a blade. In all the excitement of claiming her heritage and accepting her destiny, she'd forgotten to consider how overwhelming it must be for him too. "Kai," she said, turning to face him fully. "Look at me." When he met her eyes, she let all her defenses drop, letting him see not the powerful queen but the woman who loved him desperately. "I could have all the magic in the world," she said, "command every supernatural creature on the planet, and it would mean nothing without you beside me. The power doesn't make me complete, you do." She gestured toward the crown of all seasons, which sat on a nearby table, still glowing softly, with residual energy. "That crown connects me to every werewolf alive, but this..." She placed his hand over her heart, where the mate bond thrummed with golden warmth. "This connects me to the only person whose opinion really matters." Kai's expression softened slightly. "I know you love me, but love and need are different things. You're strong enough to lead our people, wise enough to make the hard decisions, powerful enough to face any enemy. What do you actually need me for?" Instead of answering with words, Lyra leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her love and desperation and certainty into the connection between them. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "Because power without love is tyranny," she whispered. "Because wisdom without heart is coldness. Because strength without compassion is cruelty." She traced the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "I need you to remind me that being a good queen means staying a good person. I need you to be the voice that tells me when I'm making decisions from fear instead of love. And if I disagree with you, if I think you're wrong about something..." Lyra smiled, and this time it was purely human, with no trace of otherworldly authority. "Then you tell me I'm wrong. The same way you would have a month ago, before any of this happened." To prove her point, she deliberately relaxed her control over the royal magic, letting her enhanced presence fade until she was just a woman sitting with the man she loved. The silver fire in her eyes dimmed to normal human brown, and the harmonic undertones disappeared from her voice. "Better?" she asked. Kai studied her face carefully, then slowly smiled. "There you are. I was starting to wonder if I'd lost you to the crown." "Never," she said firmly. "The crown serves me, not the other way around. And I serve our people. All of them, including you." He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I'm sorry for doubting. It's just everything happened so fast. One day I was a guardian protecting ancient secrets. The next I'm a consort to the most powerful werewolf in existence. Consort. Lyra raised an eyebrow. Is that a proposal, Kai Blackthorn? His golden eyes lit up with mischief. Actually, it is. But not the way you think. Before she could ask what he meant, he was sliding off the couch onto one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Lyra Whitmore, he said formally, though his voice shook slightly with emotion, last daughter of House Linares, rightful queen of all werewolves, and the woman who stole my heart the moment I saw her. Will you do me the honor of becoming my mate in the eyes of our people and the moon herself? Lyra's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a ring unlike anything she'd ever seen. The band was carved from what looked like solidified moonlight, and the stone was a perfect sphere that seemed to contain a miniature galaxy of stars. It's a moonstone from the sacred grove, Kai explained. My family has guarded it for 15 generations, waiting for the queen who would be worthy to wear it. It's said that when the true royal mate places it on her finger, it will bind their souls together for eternity. Tears sparkled in Lyra's eyes as she looked from the incredible ring to the man offering it. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, of course, yes. The moment Kai slipped the ring onto her finger, the entire castle shook. Power erupted from the joining, silver and gold light intertwining as the mate bond between them completed itself in full. Through the windows, they could see wolves throughout the valley lifting their voices in celebration, somehow sensing the significance of what had just occurred. But more than that, Lyra felt the change within herself. The royal magic that had sometimes felt overwhelming now felt perfectly balanced, tempered by Kai's steady strength. She was still the queen, still connected to every werewolf alive, but now she had an anchor. Someone whose love would keep her grounded no matter how high the crown lifted her. The bonding ceremony, she said, sudden realization hitting her. We'll need to plan. Tomorrow, Kai said firmly, pulling her back down beside him. Tonight, let's just be us. They curled up together on the couch, watching the moon rise over their growing kingdom. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of construction as more wolves arrived each day, building homes and workshops and all the infrastructure of a thriving community. What do you think happens next? Lyra asked, her head resting on Kai's shoulder. We build something amazing, he said simply. A place where werewolves can be proud of who they are, where the old bloodlines are honored but new ones are welcome, where strength comes from unity instead of division. And the other supernatural species? The vampires and fae who see us as a threat. Kai's arms tightened around her protectively. We prove them wrong. We show them that a strong werewolf nation means a more stable supernatural world for everyone. And if they don't want to listen? His smile was sharp and predatory. Then we remind them why werewolves were the dominant supernatural species for most of recorded history. Lyra laughed, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. I love that you're protective, but I hope it doesn't come to that. There's been enough fighting. Whatever comes, Kai said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. We'll face it together. Queen and consort, alpha and mate, bound by love and sworn to protect our people. As if responding to his words, the mate bond pulsed with warm golden light, and Lyra felt a certainty settle in her bones. Whatever challenges lay ahead, ancient enemies, political intrigue, the enormous task of rebuilding their civilization, they would meet them united. The moonstone ring caught the light from the window, casting tiny rainbows across the chamber walls. In its depths, Lyra thought she could see glimpses of their future. Not the visions of prophecy, but the simple human moments that would make their reign meaningful. Quiet mornings, shared laughter, the children they would someday raise together. I can feel them, you know, she said softly. Who? Our people. All of them. Every wolf from Alaska to Mexico, feeling hope for the first time in centuries. Believing that maybe we really can build something better. Kai squeezed her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. No pressure or anything. None at all, she agreed with a laugh. Then, more seriously, but I think we can do it. Not because we're perfect, but because we understand what the old rulers got wrong. They tried to rule through fear and rigid hierarchy. We'll lead through love and earned respect. Starting with our bonding ceremony tomorrow, Kai said. Speaking of which, Elena's been planning it for weeks. I think she's more excited than we are. She's been amazing, Lyra agreed. All of them have. I couldn't ask for better advisors and friends. They fell into comfortable silence, content to simply be together as the moon rose higher and the sounds of their growing community settled into the peaceful rhythm of evening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new tests of their leadership. But tonight, they were just two people in love, planning a future that seemed bright with possibility. Outside, a wolf howled, not in challenge or fear, but in pure joy, and the sound was taken up by dozens of other voices across the valley. It was the song of a people coming home, of a dynasty reborn, of love triumphant over centuries of division and loss. And at the heart of it all, a queen and her chosen mate, bound together by bonds stronger than magic, deeper than prophecy, and more enduring than time itself. Chapter 8. The vampire delegation arrived at dawn, their timing a calculated insult. Lyra stood on the battlements of the restored castle, watching 3 sleek black cars wind their way up the mountain road. Even from this distance, her enhanced senses could detect the supernatural cold that surrounded the vehicles like a death shroud. Coven Masters Drackle, Bathory, and Voss, Elena reported, lowering her binoculars. The 3 most powerful vampire lords on the continent, traveling together. That's unprecedented. Kai moved to stand beside Lyra, his presence warm and reassuring against her back. It could be a good sign. If they're willing to come here personally instead of sending underlings, maybe they're serious about negotiating. Or they want to assess our defenses before they attack. Victor growled from his position near the tower stairs. The Ironwood Alpha had remained at the castle as one of Lyra's military advisors, his earlier hostility replaced by fierce loyalty after witnessing her power in the Dreaming. Lyra studied the approaching convoy, her royal senses picking up subtle details that would have been invisible to ordinary werewolves. The cars were armored, but not heavily, more for protection during travel than for assault. The vampire's psychic auras carried tension and wariness, but not the cold focus of predators preparing to strike. They're here to talk, she decided. But they're scared. The restoration of the werewolf monarchy has upset the balance of power they've maintained for centuries. Good, Marcus said with satisfaction. Let them worry for a change. But Lyra shook her head. Fear makes people and vampires do stupid things. We need to reassure them that we're not interested in conquest, just in protecting our own people. The convoy reached the castle gates just as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, forcing the vampires to hurry through the entrance courtyard with hoods pulled up and faces averted from the light. Lyra had ordered the great hall prepared for the meeting, with heavy curtains drawn across the windows and torches providing the only illumination. Coven Master Drackle entered first, and Lyra was surprised by his appearance. She'd expected something ancient and imposing, but the vampire lord looked like a businessman in an expensive suit, average height, silver hair, pale blue eyes that held centuries of intelligence. Only the complete stillness of his form and the way shadows seemed to bend around him revealed his supernatural nature. Your Majesty, he said with a formal bow that managed to be respectful without being subservient. I am Vlad Drackle, speaking for the Eastern Territories. May I present my colleagues, Countess Bathory of the Southern Covens and Lord Voss of the Western Dominions. The woman who stepped forward was striking rather than beautiful, with sharp features and dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes were the color of fresh blood, and when she smiled, her fangs were clearly visible. The famous werewolf queen, she said, her accent carrying hints of old Europe. Younger than I expected, but the power radiating from you is impressive. Lord Voss remained silent, but his pale gray eyes tracked every detail of the room with predatory precision. He was the youngest looking of the 3, probably turned sometime in the past century, but his psychic presence felt like standing too close to a glacier. Please be seated, Lyra said, gesturing to the chairs that had been arranged in a circle rather than the traditional formal configuration with her throne elevated above her guests. I appreciate you coming so far to meet face to face. When the werewolf nation reunites under a queen who can command the loyalty of every pack from Alaska to Mexico, Drackle said as he settled into his chair, it becomes a matter of concern for all supernatural species. Concern or opportunity? Lyra asked mildly. Bathory leaned forward, her blood-red eyes glittering. That depends entirely on your intentions, young queen. The last werewolf monarch to wield the kind of power you've awakened used it to launch a war that lasted 2 centuries. Queen Morwen the Terrible, Elena said quietly. She ruled during the Dark Ages, tried to bring all supernatural creatures under werewolf dominion. Precisely. Voss spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the faint accent of old California money. She viewed vampires as an inferior species, fae as amusing pets, and humans as cattle to be herded. Her reign ended only when the covens united with the elder fae courts to bring her down. Lyra felt the weight of history pressing down on the conversation. Every choice she made now would be viewed through the lens of past conflicts and ancient grievances. I'm not Queen Morwen, she said simply. I have no interest in dominating other supernatural species. My only goal is to protect and strengthen the werewolf nation. Noble words, Drackle said. But power has a way of corrupting noble intentions. You've already demonstrated the ability to purge demon corruption from an entire army, to command the loyalty of every werewolf bloodline, to access magic that hasn't been seen for centuries. How do we know you won't decide that vampires pose a threat to your people's safety? Because I understand something Queen Morwen didn't, Lyra replied. Strength comes from cooperation, not domination. A supernatural world where one species rules over all the others is unstable and doomed to collapse. She gestured around the great hall, where werewolves from dozens of different packs mingled freely. Look at my own people. For 3 centuries, we were weak because we were divided. The Corvinas maintained control by keeping the bloodlines separate and suspicious of each other. It wasn't until we remembered how to work together that we regained our true strength. You're proposing an alliance? Bathory asked, though her tone suggested she found the idea either amusing or insulting. I'm proposing recognition of mutual sovereignty, Lyra corrected. Defined territories, agreed-upon boundaries, protocols for handling disputes between our species. A supernatural United Nations, if you will. The 3 vampire lords exchanged glances that spoke of centuries of shared experience and complex political calculations. And if we refuse? Voss asked. Lyra let a hint of silver fire flicker in her eyes, not a threat, but a reminder of the power backing her words. Then you'll be making the same mistake the Corvinas made. You'll be assuming that the old balance of power still applies. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as the vampire's own power responded to the implied challenge. But instead of escalating the tension, Drackle held up a hand. Peace, he said. We didn't come here to start a war. We came to take the measure of the new queen and determine whether coexistence is possible. And your assessment? Lyra asked. Drackle was quiet for a long moment, his ancient eyes studying her face. You're not what we expected, he admitted. Most werewolf alphas rule through fear and displays of dominance. You prefer negotiation and reasoned argument. Most werewolf alphas don't carry the wisdom of 15 generations of queens, Lyra pointed out. I've learned from the mistakes of my predecessors. Perhaps, Bathory said. But wisdom can be overcome by circumstance. What happens when your people demand action against perceived threats? What happens when younger, more aggressive alphas challenge your peaceful approach? Before Lyra could answer, alarms began echoing through the castle, not the mechanical sirens of modern security systems, but the deep, resonant horns that had called werewolves to battle for millennia. Kai was on his feet instantly, his enhanced hearing already sorting through the chaos of sounds from outside. Multiple contacts approaching from the north, he reported. Fast, coordinated, and definitely not friendly. Lyra rose from her chair, the crown of all seasons blazing to life as her royal senses expanded to encompass the entire valley. What she felt made her blood run cold. "Fae," she breathed. "A war party from the Winter Court, led by..." Her eyes widened in shock. "By Queen Mab herself." Draco cursed in a language that predated Latin. "The unseelie queen doesn't leave her realm unless she intends to make a statement written in blood." "What's her grievance with the werewolves?" Kai asked, already moving toward the weapons rack mounted on the wall. "We don't know yet," Lyra said, her mind racing through possibilities. "But whatever it is, she's not coming to talk. I can feel her magic from here. Winter wind and killing frost, older and colder than anything I've encountered." Through the great hall's windows, they could see riders approaching across the valley, tall figures mounted on horses that seemed to be made of living shadow, their forms wreathed in mist and starlight. At their head rode a figure whose presence made the air itself brittle with cold. Queen Mab of the Winter Court was beautiful in the way that avalanches were beautiful, terrible and majestic, and absolutely deadly. Her hair was white as fresh snow, her skin pale as winter moonlight, and her eyes held the merciless blue of deep ice. She wore armor that seemed to be carved from a single piece of glacier, and the sword at her side radiated cold so intense that frost formed on the castle walls as she drew near. "Your Majesty," Elena said urgently, "perhaps we should retreat to the inner defenses." "No," Lyra said firmly. "I won't hide from this. If Queen Mab wants to confront me, then we'll meet on equal terms." She walked toward the great hall's main doors, power radiating from her in waves that made every werewolf in the castle feel the presence of their queen. Behind her, the vampire lords rose from their chairs with predatory grace. "This changes things," Draco said quietly. "If the Winter Court is moving against you, then the balance of supernatural power is shifting more dramatically than we anticipated." "Are you withdrawing your offer to negotiate?" Lyra asked without turning around. "On the contrary," Bathory said, her voice carrying a note of anticipation. "We're offering to stand with you. An attack on the werewolf queen by the unseelie court threatens all of our interests." Lyra felt a surge of surprised gratitude. She'd expected the vampires to remain neutral at best, or to withdraw entirely at the first sign of conflict. "Thank you," she said simply. The castle's main doors swung open without anyone touching them, revealing Queen Mab seated regally on her shadow horse in the courtyard. Her retinue of Winter Court fae spread out behind her like a living frost, their alien beauty and otherworldly presence making the air shimmer with magical tension. "Queen Lyra of House Linares," Mab said, her voice carrying the sound of wind through ice caves. "Last daughter of a failed dynasty, pretender to powers beyond your understanding. I have come to deliver judgment upon you and your kind." "On what grounds?" Lyra asked, stepping fully outside to face the Fae Queen. Frost began forming on the stones beneath Mab's horse, but Lyra's own power pushed back against the supernatural cold, creating a circle of warmth around her. "On the grounds of ancient law and blood debt," Mab replied. "Your ancestor, Queen Selene, swore an oath to my predecessor 3 centuries ago. An oath that was broken when she fell to mortal weakness and left her obligations unfulfilled." Lyra felt the weight of inherited guilt, but also a growing anger. Queen Selene was murdered by traitors. She hardly fell to mortal weakness. "She chose love over duty," Mab said with contempt. "She allowed her heart to rule her head, and in doing so, she doomed the supernatural compact that had kept our worlds in balance for millennia." "What compact?" Lyra demanded. Mab's smile was sharp as winter wind. "The treaty that prevented the Fae courts from claiming dominion over the mortal realm. In exchange for our restraint, the werewolf monarchy pledged to serve as guardians of the barriers between worlds, preventing incursions by demons and other hostile entities." Understanding dawned on Lyra like a cold sunrise. The demon portal that Lady Corvina opened was only possible because the royal bloodline had abdicated its responsibilities for 3 centuries, Mab finished. "Your people's weakness allowed corruption to seep into the mortal world, nearly triggering a catastrophic breach between dimensions. But we stopped it, Lyra protested. We closed the portal and purged the demon influence. Too little, too late, Mab said dismissively. The damage was done. The barriers have been weakened, and even now, entities from the lower realms are testing our defenses. The Winter Court has been forced to commit significant resources to maintaining the cosmic balance that should have been your responsibility. Lyra felt the crushing weight of inherited failure, but also a growing determination. Then let me help. Let the Werewolf Nation fulfill its ancient obligations. You? Mab laughed, and the sound was like breaking ice. You're barely a month into your reign, child. You lack the knowledge, the experience, and the power to guard against threats that have been contained for millennia. Then teach me, Lyra said simply. The request seemed to surprise the Fey Queen. She studied Lyra with those merciless blue eyes, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. You would submit to Fey instruction? Accept the guidance of those your predecessor abandoned. If it means protecting both our peoples, yes. Mab was silent for a long moment, her alien mind clearly processing calculations that no mortal could follow. Finally, she dismounted from her shadow horse and stepped closer to Lyra.
Very well, she said.
I will test your worthiness to inherit Celine's burden. But be warned, Fey tests are not like mortal trials. We do not measure strength or courage, but the deeper qualities of wisdom and sacrifice. She raised her hand, and the air between them began to shimmer with otherworldly energy. Answer me this, young queen. If you could save your mate's life by condemning 1,000 innocent humans to death, would you do it? The question hit Lyra like a physical blow. Through the mate bond, she could feel Kai's presence, warm and steady and absolutely precious to her. The thought of losing him made her soul ache with anticipated grief. But she also thought of the humans living in the towns scattered throughout the valley, going about their daily lives with no knowledge of the supernatural forces that surrounded them. They had families, dreams, hopes for the future just as real as her own. No, she said, the word tearing from her throat like a confession. I would find another way, or I would accept the loss. Even knowing that his death would break the mate bond and leave you incomplete for the rest of your immortal life? Lyra's hands clenched into fists, but her voice remained steady. Even then, Mab nodded slowly. And if saving those 1,000 humans required you to sacrifice yourself, leaving your people without their queen in their hour of greatest need, then I would find a way to ensure their safety before I died, Lyra replied. A good ruler doesn't abandon their responsibilities, even in death. Interesting, Mab murmured. She raised her hand again, and this time the shimmer of magic was darker, more complex. Final question, and this one will cost you something regardless of your answer. Would you accept a binding haze that would prevent you from ever using your royal power for personal gain, knowing that such restraint might one day doom someone you love? Lyra understood the trap inherent in the question. A haze was Fey magic, unbreakable once accepted. It would limit her options forever, potentially forcing her to watch people she cared about suffer or die because she couldn't bend the rules to save them. But it would also prove, beyond any doubt, that her power served the greater good rather than her own desires. I accept, she said. The words triggered an explosion of winter magic that swept through the courtyard like a living blizzard. But instead of cold and pain, Lyra felt something else, a sense of completion, as if pieces of herself that had been scattered were finally coming together. When the magical storm cleared, Queen Mab was kneeling in the frostbitten courtyard, her head bowed in acknowledgement. Rise, Queen Lyra of House Linares, she said formally. Guardian of the barriers, protector of the compact, keeper of the balance between worlds. The Winter Court recognizes your authority and pledges its aid in the trials to come. Lyra helped the Fey Queen to her feet, still stunned by the rapid turn of events. The haze? What exactly did I agree to? Mab's smile was warmer now, though still edged with winter. You bound yourself to serve the greater good above personal desire. It will not prevent you from protecting those you love, but it will ensure that such protection never comes at the expense of innocence. And the barriers between worlds? will be your responsibility to maintain, with the full support of both the winter and summer courts. Mab glanced toward the Great Hall, where the vampire lords had been watching the entire exchange with fascination. It seems you've already begun building the alliances necessary for such a task. Lyra nodded, feeling the weight of new responsibilities settling on her shoulders like a familiar cloak. The compact you mentioned, I want to know everything about it. Every detail, every obligation, every potential threat. As you should, Mab agreed. But first, you have more immediate concerns. The disturbance caused by Lady Corvina's demon portal has attracted attention from entities far worse than the ones she summoned. Even now, something ancient and hungry stirs in the spaces between worlds, drawn by the scent of dimensional weakness. What kind of something? Kai asked, moving to stand protectively beside Lyra. Queen Mab's expression grew grave. The kind that devoured entire civilizations before the barriers were first established. The kind that views our reality as nothing more than a particularly interesting meal. She remounted her shadow horse, her winter court retinue falling into formation around her. Prepare your people, Queen Lyra. The real test of your reign is about to begin. As the Fae delegation disappeared into mist and starlight, Lyra felt the weight of destiny pressing down on her with renewed force. She thought the hardest part was over, claiming her heritage, uniting the werewolf bloodlines, establishing her authority over the supernatural community. But she was beginning to understand that everything up to this point had been preparation for the true challenge ahead. Chapter 9. 3 days after Queen Mab's visit, the first reality breach appeared in the abandoned mining town of Silver Creek, 50 miles north of the castle. Lyra felt it like a knife wound in her soul, a torn place where the fabric of existence had been ripped open, letting something alien and hungry seep through. The whole town is gone, Marcus reported grimly, his usually steady voice shaken by what he'd witnessed. Not destroyed, gone. Like it never existed. There's just empty space where 1,200 people live their lives. Lyra stood in the castle's war room, surrounded by maps and reports from scout teams across the territory. The crown of all seasons pulsed with urgent light, its connection to the supernatural forces of the world showing her the spreading pattern of dimensional instability. How many breaches so far? She asked Elena, who was coordinating intelligence from both werewolf and vampire sources. 7 confirmed, 3 more possible, Elena replied. All in locations where Lady Corvina's people had established demon-binding circles. It's like her corruption left weak spots in reality that something is exploiting. Kai moved to stand beside Lyra, his presence warm and reassuring in the midst of the crisis. Any pattern to the disappearances? They're moving in a spiral pattern, centered on the castle, Victor said, tracing the progression on a tactical map. Whatever this thing is, it's working its way toward us. Or toward the royal bloodline, Coven Master Drackle added from his position near the room's heavily curtained windows. The vampire lord had remained at the castle since the meeting with Queen Mab, along with several of his most trusted agents. Ancient entities often have long memories. If this creature was banished during the reign of a previous werewolf queen, it might see a return as an opportunity for revenge. A chill ran down Lyra's spine. How do I find out what we're dealing with? The archive of forbidden knowledge, Elena said quietly. It's hidden in the deepest vaults beneath the castle. Your grandmother mentioned it in her journals, but I've never been able to locate it. Because it only opens for the royal bloodline, came a new voice from the war room's entrance. Everyone turned to see an elderly woman leaning heavily on a silver-tipped cane, her white hair braided with ribbons that seemed to shimmer with their own light. Grandmother Moira, Elena breathed in recognition. I thought you were dead. The old woman chuckled, her eyes twinkling with ancient mischief. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, child. I've been waiting in the sacred grove for the rightful queen to return. She turned to Lyra, her gaze suddenly sharp and assessing. You're stronger than Celine was at your age, but that won't be enough for what's coming. The Void Walker has awakened, and it remembers the taste of our reality. Void Walker? Lyra asked. Moira's expression grew grave. An entity from the spaces between dimensions, pure hunger given form and intelligence. It was banished by Queen Morwen during her war against the Elder Demons, locked away in a prison of crystallized time and space. But Lady Corvina's portal weakened the barriers, Lyra said, understanding dawning. The prison is breaking down. Precisely. And when it breaks completely, the Voidwalker will have access to our entire reality. It will consume everything, matter, energy, life itself, until nothing remains but empty darkness. The war room fell silent as the magnitude of the threat sank in. This wasn't a problem that could be solved through diplomacy or conventional warfare. They were facing something that could literally end the world. How did Queen Morwen defeat it the first time? Kai asked. Moira's smile was sharp and predatory. She didn't defeat it. She trapped it by sacrificing half her kingdom as bait, then using the deaths of millions of her own people to power a binding spell of unimaginable complexity. That's not an option, Lyra said immediately. I know, child. Which is why we need to find another way. Moira gestured with her cane toward the war room's floor. The archive is directly below us, sealed behind wards that have protected its secrets for over 1,000 years. But I must warn you, the knowledge contained within comes at a price. What kind of price? Truth, Moira said simply. The archive shows you not just the information you seek, but all the consequences of acting on that knowledge. Some truths are heavy enough to break souls. Lyra looked around the room at the faces of her advisors and allies. Elena's scholarly determination, Victor's warrior's resolve, Kai's unwavering support, even Drakel's ancient cunning. They were all depending on her to find a solution. Show me the way, she said. The entrance to the archive was hidden behind what appeared to be a solid stone wall in the castle's deepest basement. But when Lyra placed her hand on the ancient symbols carved into the rock, they blazed with silver fire, and the wall dissolved like morning mist. Beyond lay a spiral staircase carved from what looked like crystallized starlight, descending into depths that seemed to extend far beyond what the castle's foundations should allow. As they descended, the air grew thick with magic so old and powerful that it made Lyra's enhanced senses ring like struck bells. The archive itself was a vast circular chamber whose walls stretched up into darkness, lined with shelves that held not books but crystalline formations that pulsed with captured knowledge. At the chamber's center stood a pedestal holding a single black crystal the size of her head. The memory of all things, Moira explained. It contains the accumulated wisdom of every werewolf queen who ever lived, along with knowledge gathered from across the supernatural world. But touching it will show you not just the information you need, but the true cost of every possible solution. Lyra approached the pedestal slowly, feeling the weight of history pressing down on her. Every queen before her had faced impossible choices, had sacrificed pieces of their souls to protect their people. Now, it was her turn to pay that price. She placed her hands on the black crystal, and knowledge exploded through her mind like lightning. She saw the Voidwalker in its true form, a mass of living darkness shot through with veins of anti-light, a creature whose very existence negated reality around it. She felt its hunger, vast and patient and utterly alien, its desire to consume not just life and matter, but the concepts that gave existence meaning. But she also saw its nature, and with understanding came the glimmering possibility of hope. It's not truly alive, she gasped, her consciousness reeling from the contact with cosmic forces beyond mortal comprehension. It's a wound in reality that gained sentience, a scar left over from the creation of the universe itself. Which means? Kai asked urgently. Lyra's eyes blazed with silver fire as the crystal's knowledge integrated with her royal power. Which means it can be healed instead of destroyed. But the process will require. She faltered as the full implications hit her. What? Elena demanded. What will it require? The willing sacrifice of a royal bloodline's power, Lyra whispered. Not death, something worse. The complete surrendering of supernatural abilities, permanently severed from the magic that makes werewolves what they are. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the crystal formations around them. You would become fully human, Moira said gently. cut off from the pack bonds, unable to shift, stripped of all the enhanced abilities that define our nature. And because you're the keystone of the royal magic, the effect would ripple through every werewolf bloodline. Our entire species would be reduced to ordinary humans. But everyone would live, Lyra said. The world would survive. As would the vampires, the fae, and every other supernatural species, Drackle pointed out. You'd be saving far more than just humanity. Kai stepped closer, his golden eyes blazing with protective fury. There has to be another way. The crystal is wrong, or there's something we're missing. No, Lyra said sadly, the certainty settling in her bones like ice. This is the choice. Sacrifice our nature to save existence itself, or watch everything we've ever cared about be consumed by an alien hunger. She looked around at her friends and allies, seeing the grief and desperation in their faces. But she also saw something else, acceptance, and a pride that made her heart ache. We'll find another way, Elena said fiercely. There has to be. Elena. Lyra's voice carried the weight of royal authority, but also infinite gentleness. We both know there isn't time. The Voidwalker will break free within days, and when it does, the consumption will accelerate exponentially. By the time we could research alternatives, it would be too late. She turned to face Kai, her heart breaking at the pain in his eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know this isn't the future we planned. Don't, he said roughly, pulling her into his arms. Don't apologize for being brave enough to save the world. I won't be able to shift anymore, she said, tears streaming down her face. I won't be your mate in the supernatural sense. The bond between us will become purely human. Do you think I care? Kai interrupted fiercely. Do you think any of that matters compared to being able to spend the rest of our lives together? I fell in love with you, Lyra. Not with your wolf, not with your magic, but with the woman who was brave enough to accept a destiny she never asked for. He cupped her face in his hands, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. Whatever you become after this ritual, you'll still be my queen. You'll still be the person I want to spend forever with. Lyra kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude and desperate hope into the connection between them. When they broke apart, she felt stronger, not magically, but in the ways that truly mattered. How long do we have to prepare? She asked Moira. The ritual must be performed at the next new moon, the elderly woman replied. 3 days from now, when the boundaries between worlds are at their thinnest. Then we'd better get started, Lyra said, straightening her shoulders. I want messages sent to every pack leader, every supernatural faction that owes allegiance to the crown. They deserve to know what's about to happen. And the human governments? Drackle asked. We'll never know how close they came to extinction, Lyra replied. Some burdens are ours alone to bear. As they prepared to leave the archive, Moira caught Lyra's arm gently. Child, she said, her ancient eyes soft with compassion, you should know, the ritual won't just strip your supernatural nature. It will also erase most of your memories of the werewolf world. You'll remember being in love with Kai, remember your friends, but the magical aspects of your life will fade like half-remembered dreams. The final blow hit Lyra like a physical force. To save the world, she would have to forget that she had ever been anything more than human. But looking at the faces around her, at Kai's unwavering love, at Elena's fierce loyalty, at the respect and admiration of warriors and leaders who had chosen to follow her, she knew the choice was still worth making. Some sacrifices were too important to refuse, no matter what they cost. Chapter 10. The night before the new moon, Linares Castle blazed with lights that could be seen from orbit. Werewolves from across the continent had gathered in the valley below, their campfires stretching as far as the eye could see. They'd come to witness the end of an age, the last act of their royal bloodline, the sacrifice that would save the world and cost them everything they'd ever been. Lyra stood on the highest tower of the castle, wearing a simple white dress instead of royal regalia. Tomorrow's ritual required her to approach as a willing sacrifice, stripped of all symbols of earthly power. The crown of all seasons sat on a table behind her, its light dimmed to barely more than a whisper. Second thoughts? Elena asked, joining her on the wind-swept battlement. Dozens, Lyra admitted. But not about the choice itself. About everything I won't be able to remember afterward. Elena was quiet for a moment, her scholarly mind clearly wrestling with concepts that defied easy categorization. Moira thinks the memory loss might not be complete. She says the heart remembers things the mind forgets. I hope so, Lyra said softly. I don't want to forget what it felt like to be part of something larger than myself. To feel the bonds connecting me to thousands of souls, to know that my strength came from their loyalty and love. You won't forget that, came Kai's voice from the tower stairs. He emerged onto the battlement carrying 2 steaming cups of tea, his face drawn with exhaustion. He'd spent the day coordinating the final preparations for the ritual, ensuring that every detail was perfect. How can you be so certain? Lyra asked, accepting the warm cup gratefully. Because that's who you are at your core, he said simply. Magic didn't make you a leader, Lyra. It just gave you the tools to express what was already inside you. Below them, the gathered werewolves began to sing, not the howling choruses of their wolf forms, but human voices raised in ancient harmonies that spoke of sacrifice and honor and love that transcended death itself. The sound rose through the mountain air like incense, carrying with it the hopes and fears of an entire species. They know, Lyra said, listening to the haunting melodies. They understand what tomorrow means. And they're still here, Elena pointed out. Still loyal, still willing to follow you into the unknown. Even knowing that after tomorrow, they'll be as human as anyone else. Kai set down his tea and pulled her close, his warmth chasing away the chill of the mountain air. They're here because you taught them something more valuable than supernatural abilities. You showed them what it means to be truly united. A new voice joined them on the battlement, Queen Mab, materializing out of winter starlight with her usual dramatic flair. But tonight, the Fey Queen's expression was softer than usual, touched with something that might have been respect. The barriers hold for now, she reported. But I can feel the Void Walker pressing against them. Tomorrow's dawn will see the final breach. Are you ready? Lyra asked. Mab nodded. The ritual circle is prepared, warded with the combined power of winter and summer courts. Coven Master Drackle has contributed vampire blood magic to strengthen the bindings, and the Dragon Lords of the Western Mountains have added their fire to the mixture. Dragons? Elena asked in surprise. Ancient allies of the royal bloodline, Mab explained. They've remained hidden for centuries, but the threat of universal extinction was enough to draw them from their mountain fortresses. Lyra felt a bittersweet pride at the knowledge that her sacrifice had united enemies who hadn't spoken to each other in millennia. Perhaps that unity would survive even after the werewolf nation became purely human. There's something else you should know, Mab continued, her winter blue eyes focusing on Lyra with laser intensity. The ritual will require a conduit, someone to channel the royal power into the healing matrix. It should be your closest ally, the person whose connection to you is strongest. Kai, Lyra said without hesitation. But the Fey Queen shook her head. Your mate bond will be severed when your supernatural nature is stripped away. The conduit needs to be someone whose connection to you transcends magic, someone who knew you before you claimed the crown. Lyra felt a chill of understanding. My grandmother. But she's not dead, came a familiar voice from the stairwell. Lyra spun around to see an elderly woman emerging onto the battlement, moving with surprising grace despite her apparent age. But there was something different about her now, a vitality that seemed to shine from within, making her appear younger with each step. Nana? Lyra breathed. The old woman smiled, and suddenly her form began to shimmer and change. The appearance of advanced age fell away like a discarded cloak, revealing a woman who looked remarkably like Lyra herself. The same bone structure, the same determined chin, even the same way of holding her shoulders when facing an impossible task. Hello, granddaughter, she said in a voice that was achingly familiar. I've been waiting a very long time to meet you properly. I don't understand, Lyra whispered. When I realized what was coming, what you would have to face, I made a bargain with the Fey courts. extended life in exchange for serving as the guardian of certain crucial knowledge. Her grandmother's eyes sparkled with ancient wisdom. I've been preparing for this moment for over 30 years. Tears streamed down Lyra's face as she embraced the woman who had shaped so much of her childhood. I thought I'd lost you forever. Never, little moon, her grandmother said softly. I just had to step back far enough to see the whole pattern. And what I saw told me that this moment, this choice, was always inevitable. You knew, Lyra said, not quite an accusation. You knew I would have to give up everything. I knew you might have to, her grandmother corrected gently. But I also knew that you were strong enough to make that choice if it became necessary. More importantly, I knew that the love you found, with Kai, with your people, with the very concept of service itself, would survive any transformation. She gestured toward the valley below, where thousands of werewolves continued their vigil songs. Look at them, Lyra. Really look. Do you see despair? Do you see people mourning their fate? Lyra studied the assembled crowd more carefully, her enhanced senses reading the emotional currents flowing through the gathered werewolves. What she found surprised her. They're hopeful, she said wonderingly. Sad, but hopeful. Because you've given them something more valuable than supernatural abilities, her grandmother said. You've given them a sense of purpose, of belonging to something greater than themselves. That doesn't disappear when the magic does. Dawn came too soon. The ritual circle in the castle's great courtyard was a masterwork of supernatural cooperation, silver lines traced by werewolf artificers, crystalline nodes placed by fey artisans, vampire blood runes that pulsed with dark power, and dragonfire braziers that burned with flames that cast no shadow. At the center stood two pedestals, one for the crown of all seasons, one for Lyra herself. Representatives from every supernatural faction stood around the circle's perimeter, their ancient enmities set aside in the face of universal threat. Vampire lords stood shoulder to shoulder with fey nobles, dragon princes nodded respectfully to werewolf alphas, and even entities that Lyra couldn't identify watched the proceedings with eyes that held the wisdom of ages. It's beautiful, she said, taking in the sight of so many different peoples united in common cause. It's what you made possible, Kai said, his voice rough with emotion. This unity, this cooperation, it's your legacy, not the magic you're about to give up. Lyra walked to the center of the circle, feeling the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders like a familiar cloak. The moment her feet crossed the silver boundary, power began flowing through the ancient patterns carved into the stones. Her grandmother took her position at the northern point of the circle, her hands beginning to glow with ancient light. Around the perimeter, other key participants assumed their roles, Queen Mab representing the Fey courts, Coven Master Drackle for the vampire covens, and a magnificent dragon in human form whose golden eyes held the memories of millennia. Are you ready, granddaughter? Her grandmother asked. Lyra looked once more at Kai, memorizing every detail of his beloved face, then at her friends who had become her chosen family. I'm ready. She placed the crown of all seasons on the central pedestal, and immediately the ritual circle blazed with power that made the air itself sing. But instead of the usual silver light of lunar magic, the crown now pulsed with every color of the spectrum. The healing of the void, her grandmother intoned, requires the willing sacrifice of that which was freely given. Power bestowed in love, returned in love, transformed from force of dominion into force of restoration. Lyra felt the royal magic beginning to flow out of her, centuries of accumulated power streaming through the crown and into the ritual matrix. But it wasn't being destroyed. She could sense it being transformed, changed from the aggressive energy of rulership into something gentler, but no less potent. Through her fading supernatural senses, she felt the moment when the magic reached the Void Walker. The ancient entity's scream of rage and hunger echoed across dimensions as the healing power washed over it, not destroying but transforming, filling the wound in reality that had given it birth. The process was agonizing, not physically, but spiritually, as everything that had made her supernatural was slowly, carefully stripped away. Her enhanced senses faded first, leaving her feeling blind and deaf after weeks of superhuman awareness. Then the pack bonds dissolved one by one, each severed connection like losing a piece of her soul. The mate bond with Kai was the last to go, and losing it was like having her heart torn from her chest. The golden thread that had connected them since their first meeting simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only human love, still strong, still real, but no longer enhanced by supernatural forces. When the last of the royal magic flowed into the healing matrix, Lyra collapsed to her knees, gasping as her transformed consciousness tried to adjust to purely human limitations. Around the ritual circle, she could see other werewolves experiencing the same transition, the loss of their enhanced abilities, the strange emptiness where their supernatural senses had been. But they were alive. More than that, they were still themselves, still the same people they'd always been, just without the magical gifts that had defined their species for millennia. And in the spaces between worlds, she could sense the Void Walker's transformation completing itself. What had been a wound of hungry darkness was becoming something else, a guardian entity, its alien intelligence, now focused on protecting rather than consuming. "It's done," her grandmother said, her own voice now purely human as the fey bargain that had extended her life came to an end. "The worlds are safe." Lyra struggled to her feet, amazed by how heavy her purely human body felt. But when Kai rushed to support her, his arms felt just as strong, just as safe as they always had. "How do you feel?" he asked anxiously. "Different," she said honestly. "Smaller in some ways. But also—" She paused, trying to find words for the profound sense of peace that was settling over her.
"Free.
Like I don't have to carry the weight of the entire world anymore." Around the courtyard, the assembled supernatural factions were beginning to disperse, but many simply looked respectful, recognizing that they'd witnessed something unprecedented, a species voluntarily giving up power for the greater good, a leader who had literally sacrificed everything to save people who would never know her name. Elena approached them, her movements now purely human but her intelligence undimmed. "The castle will need to be converted," she said practically. "We can't maintain a supernatural stronghold without supernatural inhabitants." "A school," Lyra said immediately. "A place where humans can learn about the supernatural world that still exists around them. Not to exploit it, but to understand and respect it." "With you as the headmistress?" Elena asked with a smile. "With all of us as the faculty," Lyra corrected. "We still have all the knowledge we gained, even if we can't access the power anymore." As the sun rose fully over the mountains, casting golden light across the transformed landscape, Lyra felt something she hadn't expected: hope. They had saved the world, yes, but more than that, they had proven that love and sacrifice could triumph over any darkness. She might no longer be a werewolf queen, but she was still a leader, still someone who could inspire others to be their best selves. And she still had Kai. "What happens now?" he asked. Lyra looked around at the castle that had been her royal seat, at the valley that had housed a supernatural kingdom, at the friends who had become her family regardless of what species they belonged to. "Now we build something new," she said. "Something that honors what we were while embracing what we've become." Some legacies, she realized, were more enduring than magic itself. Chapter 11. 2 years after the transformation, Lyra stood in the converted Great Hall of what had once been Linares Castle, watching her students file in for their morning lecture on supernatural diplomacy. The ancient throne room had been redesigned as a classroom, with comfortable chairs arranged in a semicircle rather than formal rows. Her students were an unusual mix: former werewolves learning to navigate their new humanity, vampire younglings sent by their covens to understand the changed world, fae who had chosen to study among mortals, and even a few dragons in human form, their golden eyes betraying their true nature. "Today we're discussing the Treaty of Mountain View," Lyra began, gesturing to a large map showing new territorial boundaries between supernatural and human communities. "Can anyone tell me why the vampire covens initially opposed the integration protocols?" A young woman who had once been part of the Stormwind Pack raised her hand. Because they were afraid that greater human awareness of supernatural existence would lead to persecution? Partially correct, Lyra acknowledged. But there was another factor. Marcus. Marcus Blackthorne, now serving as the school's head of security, stepped forward. His hair had gone completely silver in the months since the transformation, but his bearing remained strong. They were afraid of losing their mystique, he said with a slight smile. Vampires have always relied on fear and mystery to maintain their position. The idea of being just another minority group threatened their sense of identity. Excellent analysis, Lyra said. And how did we address their concerns? A young vampire spoke up, one of Dracul's progeny. By guaranteeing them representation in the Supernatural Council and ensuring their feeding needs would be met through willing donors.
Right.
The key insight was that cooperation didn't require assimilation. Each group could maintain their essential nature while agreeing to peaceful coexistence. As the class continued, Lyra marveled at how naturally students from different supernatural backgrounds worked together. 6 months ago, some of these young people would have been natural enemies. Now they were forming friendships that crossed species lines. After the lecture, she retreated to her office to review applications for the school's expanding programs. The Bridgewater Institute had received interest from supernatural communities worldwide. The example of successful integration in the Montana mountains was inspiring similar efforts on every continent. A knock interrupted her work.
Come in, she called.
Elena entered, carrying files and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had solved a complex puzzle. As director of research, she had thrown herself into documenting the supernatural world with scholarly passion. I have news, Elena announced. The European Federation has agreed to establish a sister school in Edinburgh. They want you to consult on the curriculum. That's wonderful, Lyra said, though she felt a pang at the thought of traveling far from the mountain home that had become so dear to her. When do they need an answer?
Soon.
But there's more. Elena's smile widened. The Pacific Alliance is interested in a similar program, and the African Council has sent a formal invitation for you to address their next gathering. Lyra leaned back, momentarily overwhelmed. I never expected it to spread so quickly. You created something unprecedented, Elena pointed out. A model for supernatural cooperation that doesn't require anyone to give up their essential nature. Of course, it's inspiring imitators. Another knock interrupted them. This time it was Kai, looking pleased despite appearing slightly harried. How was the construction meeting? Lyra asked, rising to kiss him hello. Even without their supernatural mate bond, the connection between them remained as strong as ever. Productive, he said, wrapping his arms around her waist. The new dormitory will be ready by fall semester, and the Dragon delegation has agreed to fund specialized environmental chambers for students who need specific atmospheric conditions. Dragons. Elena shook her head in amazement. A year ago, I wasn't even sure they really existed. A year ago, we were a different species, Lyra pointed out. Everything's changed. Not everything, Kai said softly, his eyes, still golden even without supernatural enhancement, meeting hers with perfect understanding. Their human love story continued to unfold with the same intensity it had always possessed, perhaps even deeper now that it was based purely on choice rather than mystical compulsion. They'd married 3 months after the transformation in a ceremony that brought together representatives from across the supernatural world. Speaking of change, Elena said carefully, I've been analyzing global statistics on supernatural integration. The results are interesting. Good interesting or bad interesting? Lyra asked. Mostly good. Crime rates in areas with established supernatural communities have dropped significantly. Economic cooperation is creating prosperity in regions that were previously struggling. And the happiness indices in integrated communities are higher than in purely human ones. Why surprising? Kai asked. Because conventional wisdom suggested humans would be happier not knowing about the supernatural world. But instead, being included in the larger reality, being trusted with the truth, has made humans feel more connected to the world around them. Lyra nodded thoughtfully. Most people spend their lives feeling isolated. Learning that there's this whole community of others, even if they're different species, reminds them that they're not alone. Plus, Kai added with a grin, having vampire neighbors makes your human problems seem pretty manageable. Elena laughed.
True.
It's hard to complain about noisy dogs when the alternative is nocturnal bloodsuckers. Speaking of which, Lyra said, glancing at the clock, I need to get ready for tonight's ceremony. Tonight marked the 2-year anniversary of the transformation, and the supernatural community had organized a celebration. Lyra wasn't entirely comfortable being the center of such attention, but she understood the importance of acknowledging how much had changed. The celebration was held in the castle's great courtyard, lit by lanterns enchanted by fey artisans to cast light in every color of the spectrum. Representatives from supernatural communities around the world had gathered, and the air hummed with dozens of different languages and magical traditions. Queen Mab was there, regal in a gown that seemed woven from winter starlight. Coven Master Drackle had arrived with vampire nobles, their pale faces animated with genuine warmth. Even the Dragon Lords had sent representatives, magnificent beings whose very presence made the air shimmer. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored guests, Lyra began when called upon to speak. 2 years ago, we made a choice that changed everything. We chose cooperation over conflict, sacrifice over selfishness, hope over fear. She looked around at the faces watching her, human and vampire, fey and dragon, former werewolves who had given up everything and supernatural beings who had chosen to trust in a new way of existing. Some might say we lost something irreplaceable in that transformation, that we gave up powers and abilities that defined us for millennia. She paused, letting her gaze linger on her former pack members, seeing not loss in their faces, but contentment. But I would argue that we didn't lose anything. We transformed it into something better. Applause rippled through the crowd, but Lyra held up a hand for silence. The old supernatural world was built on the assumption that different species had to compete for resources, territory, dominance. We've proven that assumption wrong. We've shown that cooperation creates abundance, that diversity creates strength, that understanding creates peace. She gestured toward the castle behind her, where lights glowed in windows that housed students from dozens of different supernatural backgrounds. This is our legacy. Not the power we gave up, but the bridges we built. Not the magic we lost, but the connections we forged. Not what we were, but what we've become. The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually the crowds dispersed, leaving Lyra and Kai alone on their balcony, looking out over the valley where their new community had taken root. Any regrets? Kai asked. Lyra considered it seriously, thinking about everything they'd given up and everything they'd gained. The supernatural abilities, the royal power, the mystical connections, all gone. But in their place, she had work that fulfilled her soul, relationships built on choice rather than compulsion, and the satisfaction of knowing she'd helped create something genuinely new. None, she said finally. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even without the crown? Lyra smiled, thinking of the artifact that now resided in the castle's museum, a symbol of a bygone age rather than a source of active power. Especially without the crown, she said. That was about ruling over others. This is about serving with others. And I much prefer the second option. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more students to teach, more communities to help integrate, more bridges to build between the human and supernatural worlds. But tonight, she was simply a woman in love with a good man, living a life that had meaning and purpose and hope. It was exactly the life she would have chosen, even if she'd known the cost from the beginning. Chapter 12. 5 years after the transformation, Lyra stood in the Chicago Museum of Natural History, staring at an exhibit that made her heart ache with bittersweet memory. Behind glass panels, artifacts from the old werewolf kingdom were displayed with careful scholarly labels: ancient silver ceremonial blade, medieval crown of unknown provenance, symbolic wolf carvings from pre-Columbian Montana. Quite a collection, said Dr. Sarah Chun, her former supervisor, approaching with professional curiosity and personal warmth. Hello, Sarah, Lyra said, embracing her old colleague. I hear the supernatural exhibition has been quite successful. Beyond our wildest expectations, Sarah confirmed. Attendance is up 300%, and we've had requests from museums worldwide asking for guidance on displaying supernatural artifacts respectfully. They walked through exhibition halls containing everything from fey pottery to vampire artwork to dragon scales that still gleamed with inner fire. The plaques told not just the history of objects, but the stories of the beings who had created them. Your consultation work made all the difference, Sarah continued. Having someone who actually understands these cultures, who can explain the significance, it's transformed how we approach the entire collection. Lyra nodded, feeling deep satisfaction that the museum was finally presenting the supernatural world with accuracy and respect. It's important that humans understand we were never monsters. We were just different. Were? Sarah raised an eyebrow. I thought supernatural communities were still very active. They are, Lyra corrected. I was referring to myself. I'm fully human now.
Sarah looked confused.
The reports about the transformation were rather vague. I gave up my supernatural abilities to save the world from something that would have consumed everything, Lyra explained. It was necessary. That must have been an incredible sacrifice. It was. But it was also the right choice. And I've discovered that being human doesn't mean being powerless. It just means finding different kinds of power. As if to illustrate her point, a group of children on a field trip approached their teacher, a young vampire who had chosen to work in human education, guiding them toward the werewolf section. Mrs. Blackthorne, one child called excitedly. Our teacher said you used to be a werewolf queen. Lyra smiled, kneeling to the child's level. I did for a little while, but now I'm something even better. What's that? A teacher, Lyra said. Someone who helps people understand each other, even when they're very different. After answering the children's questions about werewolves and magic and what it felt like to give up supernatural powers, turning each into a lesson about cooperation and the many different ways to be strong, Lyra completed her museum tour with Sarah. You really have found your calling, Sarah observed. It found me, Lyra corrected. Or maybe we found each other. Sarah mentioned a Smithsonian offer to oversee a permanent supernatural wing in Washington, but Lyra declined. My work is in Montana now. The Institute needs me, and I need it. The flight back to Montana gave her time to reflect. The city looked the same from the airplane window, but supernatural communities were thriving in neighborhoods that had once been purely human. Integration was happening so naturally that most people barely noticed the transformation of their daily lives. Kai met her at the regional airport, his face lighting up with joy. 5 years of purely human marriage had only deepened their connection, proving their love had never depended on supernatural bonds. How did it go? He asked, pulling her into a kiss. Better than expected, she said. The exhibition is inspiring similar projects worldwide. Sarah thinks we might be looking at a fundamental shift in how humans understand their place in the larger universe. They drove through the valley toward the castle, and Lyra marveled at how much the community had grown. What had been temporary camps was now a proper town, with shops and restaurants and homes housing both former werewolves and supernatural beings who had chosen to live alongside them. The Institute had expanded far beyond the original castle, with new buildings housing specialized programs for different supernatural species. The latest addition was a research center studying the long-term effects of the transformation. Elena's been waiting for you, Kai said. She has news that will either delight or terrify you. With Elena, it could be both. They found Elena in her office, surrounded by reports and charts, her hair in a messy bun, and wearing the slightly manic expression of someone who had just made a groundbreaking discovery. Lyra, she exclaimed, jumping up to embrace her friend. Perfect timing. You need to see this. She gestured to a chart showing supernatural population data worldwide. At first glance, the numbers seemed to show what everyone expected, a gradual decline in werewolf populations as transformed individuals aged and had human children. But looking closer, Lyra noticed something strange. The birth rates, she said slowly. They're not declining as much as predicted. Exactly, Elena said triumphantly. And look at this. She pulled out another chart. Children born to transformed werewolves are showing signs of supernatural sensitivity. Not full werewolf abilities, but enhanced senses, unusual empathy, sometimes even limited shape-shifting. Lyra felt her breath catch. That's impossible. The transformation was supposed to be permanent. Apparently not completely, Elena said. While the adult generation lost their supernatural nature, they're passing on diluted but genuine magical traits to their children. What does this mean? Kai asked. Elena's expression grew thoughtful. It means the werewolf bloodlines weren't destroyed. They were transformed into something new. These children aren't traditional werewolves, but they're not fully human either. There's something in between. A new species? Lyra asked, sinking into a chair. Possibly. Or maybe just a new expression of an old one. Elena pulled out more data. The really interesting thing is it's not just happening to former werewolves. We're seeing similar patterns in children born to parents from other supernatural species living in integrated communities. Evolution, Lyra breathed.
Exactly.
The supernatural world isn't disappearing, it's adapting, creating new forms better suited to a world where magic and mundane reality coexist openly. Over the following weeks, reports from institute branches worldwide confirmed the pattern. Children born to supernatural parents in integrated communities were displaying abilities never seen before. Werewolf-vampire hybrids with enhanced strength, Fey-dragon crossbreeds manipulating both illusion and flame, even human children developing magical sensitivity after prolonged exposure to supernatural communities. We're documenting the birth of an entirely new supernatural ecosystem, Elena reported during a faculty meeting. One based on cooperation and cross-pollination rather than species isolation. And our role? Asked Victor, now Director of Community Relations. Lyra looked around the table at faces that had become family, former werewolves, cooperative vampires, friendly fae, even dragons serving on the teaching staff. They had all given up or risked something to build this new world. Our role is what it's always been, she said. We teach, we bridge gaps, we help people understand that diversity is strength, not weakness. Even if that means teaching children with abilities we've never seen before? Marcus asked. Especially then, Lyra said firmly. These children will need guidance from people who understand both sides of their nature, the magical and the mundane, the inherited and the chosen. That evening, walking through their expanded campus with Kai, Lyra found herself thinking about the strange turns her life had taken. She had begun human, become a werewolf queen, sacrificed her supernatural nature to save the world, and now found herself at the center of a new phase of supernatural evolution. Do you think this was always meant to happen? She asked. The transformation, the integration, the emergence of these hybrid abilities? I think, Kai said carefully, that you've always been exactly where you needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. They paused at a playground built for faculty and student children, where youngsters played a game involving both physical tag and minor magical effects, trails of light following their movements, brief enhanced speed, small illusions making them temporarily invisible. They're so natural with it, Lyra observed, watching children seamlessly blend magic and play. To them, having both supernatural and human traits isn't unusual, it's just who they are. The next generation always adapts faster, Kai pointed out. These kids are growing up where cooperation between species is normal, where magic and technology coexist, where being different is celebrated rather than feared. One child, a little girl with fey-pointed ears but warm brown human eyes, noticed them watching and waved enthusiastically. Mrs. Blackthorn, look what I can do. She held up her hand, and tiny flowers bloomed from her palm, their petals shimmering with otherworldly light. That's beautiful, Sarah, Lyra called back, recognizing the daughter of one of their fey instructors and his human partner. You're getting very good at garden magic. The girl beamed and ran back to her friends, the flowers in her palm transforming into butterflies made of pure light that danced around the playground before fading. She'll never know a world where that's considered impossible, Kai observed. None of them will, Lyra agreed. They're growing up in a reality where wonder is commonplace, where magic serves community rather than conflict. As they continued their walk, they passed the memorial garden that had been planted to honor those who had died during the old conflicts: werewolves killed in the pack wars, vampires destroyed by hunters, fae who had faded from iron poisoning, dragons slain by those who feared their power. But beside the memorial was something new, a celebration wall covered with photographs and stories of successful integration, mixed marriages between different species, businesses thriving through supernatural human partnerships, and scientific breakthroughs achieved through combining magical and technological approaches. "Look at that," Lyra said, pointing to a recent addition, a photo of the first graduating class from their Edinburgh sister school, young faces representing every supernatural species imaginable, all wearing caps and gowns and expressions of hope for the future. "Your legacy," Kai said softly. "Our legacy," she corrected. "All of us who believed that love could overcome fear, that understanding could triumph over prejudice." They reached their apartment as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. From their balcony, they could see the lights of the growing community, street lamps illuminating human neighborhoods, the soft glow of fae dwellings, the controlled flame of dragon forges, the elegant architecture of vampire quarters. "Any regrets?" Kai asked, echoing a question that had become ritual between them. Lyra considered it, as she always did. The supernatural abilities were gone forever. She would never again run as a wolf, never feel the pack bonds connecting her to hundreds of souls, never command the respect that came with royal power. But in place of those losses, she had something else: the satisfaction of seeing former enemies become friends, the joy of watching children grow up in a world where their differences were celebrated, the deep fulfillment that came from building rather than ruling. "None," she said, meaning it completely. "This is exactly the life I would choose. Even knowing what it cost. Especially knowing what it cost," she said firmly. "The best things in life are worth sacrificing for." That night, as they prepared for bed, Lyra caught sight of herself in the mirror. She was older now, lines of laughter and worry etched around her eyes, silver threading through her dark hair. She looked like what she was, a human woman in her 30s who had lived a life full of purpose and love. But sometimes, when the light caught her just right, she could swear she saw a flicker of something else in her reflection, an echo of the queen she had once been, the power she had willingly given up, the magic that lived on in the world she had helped create. "Do you see it too?" she asked Kai, who was watching her with an expression of infinite tenderness. "What?" he asked, though she thought he knew. "The shadow of who I used to be." He moved behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders, his reflection joining hers in the mirror. "I see who you've always been," he said simply. "Someone brave enough to sacrifice everything for the people she loves. Someone who understands that true power comes not from what you can take, but from what you're willing to give." Lyra leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, purely human now, but no less precious for that. "I love you," she said, words that carried the weight of everything they had been through together. "I love you too," he replied, and in those simple words was the promise of all their tomorrows, human tomorrows, but filled with the magic of love freely chosen and constantly renewed. Outside their window, the lights of their community twinkled like earthbound stars, and somewhere in the distance, a child laughed with pure joy as tiny flowers bloomed from her fingertips. The old world was gone, but the new one they had built together was more beautiful than anything that had come before. As they settled into sleep, Lyra felt a profound peace settle over her. She had been a museum curator who stumbled into her heritage. She had been a werewolf queen who ruled through love rather than fear. She had been a woman who sacrificed everything to save the world. But most importantly, she was exactly who she had always been meant to be. Someone who built bridges between worlds, who saw the beauty in diversity, who understood that the greatest magic of all was the simple act of choosing to love rather than fear. The ancient bloodline sagas spoke of queens and kings, of power and conquest, of dynasties that rose and fell like the turning of seasons. But Lyra's story was different. Her legacy lived not in bloodline or crown, but in every child who grew up knowing that differences made the world more beautiful, every friendship that crossed species lines, every community that chose cooperation over conflict. Some legacies, she thought as sleep claimed her, were written not in the stars, but in the human heart. And those were the ones that truly lasted forever. In her dreams, she ran beneath a silver moon, not as a wolf but as herself, fully human, fully alive, surrounded by the laughter of children who would inherit a world where wonder and love had triumphed over ancient fears. And in that dream, she knew with perfect certainty that she had chosen well. The last daughter of House Linares slept peacefully, knowing that while the royal bloodline had ended, the dynasty of hope she had founded would endure for generations to come. 10 years later, the letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in early spring, delivered by a postal service that now routinely handled mail from dragons, messages written in Fey script, and packages that occasionally glowed with residual magic. Lyra found it slipped under her office door, sealed with wax that shimmered with all the colors of Aurora Borealis. The Bridgewater Institute had grown into a small university by then, with students from 6 continents and dozens of species. What had begun as an experiment in supernatural human cooperation had become the most prestigious institution of its kind in the world, with waiting lists that stretched for years and a faculty that included some of the most brilliant minds from both the magical and mundane worlds. Lyra, now 45 and bearing the title of Chancellor, had watched thousands of students pass through their halls. Former enemies had become lifelong friends, impossible research projects had yielded breakthrough discoveries, and the integration that had once seemed like a desperate hope had become simply the way the world worked. But this letter was different. The return address was written in a child's careful handwriting: Sarah Chinmun Whisper, age 12, New Avalon Colony, Pacific Northwest. Lyra recognized the name, the fey-human hybrid girl she had watched bloom flowers from her palms all those years ago. Dear Chancellor Blackthorn, the letter began. My name is Sarah, and you probably don't remember me, but I remember you. You used to watch us play in the gardens when I was little, back when my family lived at the Institute. I'm writing because something incredible has happened, and my parents said you would want to know. Last week, during the new moon, I was practicing my garden magic by the lake when something amazing occurred. The moonlight seemed to gather around me, and suddenly I could feel connections. Not just to the plants and animals around me, but to people. Lots and lots of people, all over the world. My Fey grandmother says it's impossible, but I think I might be developing pack bonds. Not werewolf ones, because I'm not a werewolf, but something new. Something that connects all the hybrid children like me across the globe. We're starting to find each other, to feel each other's emotions and thoughts across vast distances. Is this what it felt like when you were queen? This sense of being connected to something larger than yourself, of being responsible for others' well-being? Because if it is, I finally understand why you made the choice you did. I can feel how much love it takes to carry that kind of responsibility. I wanted to ask you something important. If this new kind of pack bond is real, if children like me are developing abilities that bridge the gap between all supernatural species, do you think we could build something even better than what exists now? Something that includes not just werewolves or fae or vampires, but everyone? My friends and I have been talking, and we think maybe the next step in supernatural evolution isn't about separate species learning to coexist. Maybe it's about becoming something new together, a generation that carries the best of all our heritages while creating something entirely unprecedented. Would you be willing to teach us? Not just the academic stuff, though the Institute's curriculum is amazing, but the real lessons about leadership and sacrifice and how to love people enough to make the hard choices for their good? I hope this letter finds you well. My parents send their regards, and they said to tell you that the flowers I grow now bloom in silver and gold, just like the royal colors of the old werewolf kingdom. They think it means something, though I'm not sure what. With deep respect and growing hope, Sarah Chunmun Whisper. P.S. I've attached a photo of the new moon ceremony. You might find it interesting. Lyra's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the photograph that had been tucked into the letter's envelope. It showed a group of perhaps 20 children and teenagers, all standing in a circle around a moonlit lake. But what made her breath catch was the light, silver and gold radiance streaming between them, connecting each young person to all the others in a web of power that was unmistakably familiar, yet entirely new. These weren't werewolves. They weren't fae or vampires or dragons. They were something unprecedented, the next step in an evolutionary process that had begun with her sacrifice 10 years ago. Children who carried the genetic heritage of multiple supernatural species, who had grown up in a world where diversity was strength, who were now developing abilities that transcended the old boundaries entirely. "Kai," she called, her voice carrying clearly through their apartment. "You need to see this." He appeared in the doorway of her study, reading glasses perched on his nose, and a stack of architectural plans in his hands. At 52, he was more distinguished than ever, his hair silver now but his golden eyes as warm as they had been the day they met. "What is it?" he asked, but his expression shifted when he saw the photograph. "Is that?" "The children," Lyra said softly. "The hybrid generation. They're manifesting pack bonds that connect across species lines." Kai set down his plans and moved to look over her shoulder as she reread parts of Sarah's letter aloud. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "So, it's starting," he said finally. "The next phase," Lyra agreed. "But this time, we're not stumbling blindly into change. This time, we can guide it from the beginning." "You're going to say yes," he said. It wasn't a question. "We're going to say yes," she corrected. "If these children need teachers who understand what it means to carry supernatural responsibility, then we'll teach them. Together." Kai smiled, the expression lighting up his entire face. A new generation of leaders, raised from childhood to see cooperation as natural, diversity as strength, love as the foundation of all power. Led by someone who chose to bloom silver and gold flowers, Lyra added, touching the photograph gently. "I think the symbolism is pretty clear." They spent the rest of the morning drafting their response to Sarah, but also making plans for something larger. If hybrid children around the world were developing connected abilities, they would need not just individual guidance, but a comprehensive program, new curricula, specialized facilities, faculty who understood the unique challenges of bridging multiple supernatural heritages. "We'll need to expand again," Kai said, sketching preliminary designs for additional buildings. Specialized dormitories for different types of hybrids, laboratories for studying cross-species magical interactions, meditation spaces for group bonding exercises. "And safeguards," Lyra added. "If these children are developing power that connects them globally, there will be those who want to exploit or control them." "Like there were those who wanted to exploit or control you," he pointed out.
Exactly.
"Which is why they need teachers who understand that true strength comes from service, not dominion." As word of the hybrid emergence spread through supernatural communities worldwide, the Bridgewater Institute received hundreds of letters from parents, children, and community leaders. The new generation was manifesting everywhere: vampire fae crosses who could manipulate both shadow and light, dragon werewolf hybrids with scales that shifted color with their emotions, even human children who had developed magical sensitivity through prolonged exposure to integrated communities. But it was Sarah's follow-up letter, arriving 2 weeks later, that truly outlined the scope of what was happening. "Dear Chancellor and Mr. Blackthorne," it began. "Thank you for your wonderful response. All of us in the emerging network felt your acceptance and excitement through the bonds. It was like sunrise after a long night. I need to tell you something important. The connections aren't random or chaotic. They're organized, almost like the old pack structures, but more complex. We can feel natural leaders emerging, children whose gifts seem designed to guide and protect others. But we can also feel the scared ones, the lonely ones, the kids whose abilities are manifesting in ways that frighten their families. Yesterday, I connected with a boy in Tokyo whose dragon heritage is causing him to breathe actual fire when he gets upset. His parents don't know what to do, and the local supernatural communities are afraid he might accidentally hurt someone. Through the network, some of us were able to teach him calming techniques, but he needs real guidance. There's also a girl in Sao Paulo whose vampire-fae combination lets her see people's deepest fears and greatest hopes simultaneously. She's so overwhelmed by the emotional input that she hasn't spoken aloud in months. But when she communicates through the network, her insights are profound. She can help others understand themselves in ways that promote healing and growth. We're not just developing individual powers, Chancellor Blackthorn. We're becoming something collective, something that could help heal the divisions that still exist in our world. But we need guides who understand both the opportunities and the responsibilities that come with this kind of gift. Could the Institute develop a program specifically for us? Not just education, but training in ethics, philosophy, and the kind of leadership that serves rather than rules? We dream of a world where the last barriers between species dissolve not through conquest, but through love. Is that naive? Or is it the next step in the evolution you began when you chose to sacrifice your crown for the greater good? With growing hope and determination, Sarah and the network. Lyra set the letter down and looked out her office window at the campus that had grown from the ruins of an ancient castle. Students of every supernatural heritage walked the paths between buildings, their easy friendship and cooperation a daily testament to what was possible when fear was replaced with understanding. But this new generation offered something even greater, the possibility of transcending species barriers entirely, of creating a truly unified supernatural community that could work as partners with humanity rather than as separate groups negotiating for coexistence. "It's time," she said aloud, though Kai wasn't in the room to hear her. Time to take the next step in a journey that had begun the night she discovered her werewolf heritage. Time to help guide a new generation of leaders who could build bridges not just between existing communities, but toward entirely new forms of cooperation and understanding. Time to prove that some legacies were bigger than bloodlines, more enduring than magic, more powerful than any crown. The ancient bloodline sagas spoke of dynasties that rose and fell, of power passed from parent to child through generations of conflict and conquest. But the story Lyra was helping to write was different. It was about chosen families that transcended species, about power that grew through sharing rather than hoarding, about love that created possibilities no one had dared to imagine. She picked up her pen and began drafting the proposal that would transform the Bridgewater Institute once again, this time into something unprecedented in the history of the supernatural world. A place where the next generation of leaders could learn not just to manage their abilities, but to use them in service of a vision larger than any single species or community. As she wrote, silver light seemed to dance around her fingers. Not magic, exactly, but something deeper. The echo of royal power transformed into something even more precious, the ability to inspire others to become the best versions of themselves. Outside her window, students were gathering for their afternoon classes, and among them Lyra noticed something new. Children who moved with the fluid grace of multiple heritages, whose laughter carried harmonics that spoke of gifts yet to be fully understood, whose very presence seemed to make the world around them brighter and more hopeful. The old dynasty was gone, but the new one, built not on bloodline but on chosen connection, not on power over others but on power shared with others, was just beginning. And for the first time in 10 years, Lyra felt the stirring of something that might have been her old supernatural awareness. Not returning, but transforming, becoming something suited to this new world where magic and love, sacrifice and hope, ancient wisdom and unprecedented possibility all combined to create something entirely new under the silver moon. Some legacies, she thought with deep satisfaction, were worth every sacrifice required to birth them into the world. The dynasty of hope was about to enter its next phase, and she could hardly wait to see what wonders it would bring.
The end.